we will have seen something like this, and it's partly why we wanted to talk to Michael Allen. He's with us from Beacon Global Strategies, managing director and partner, having spent a career in national security, specifically in the George W. Bush administration. It's great to have you back, Michael. The significance of these sanctions coming from the Biden White House, things are not getting easier with Israel, are they?
No, I think that's exactly right. The Biden administration is continually unhappy with Benjamin Netanyahu and the way that his cabinet is conducting the war with Gaza, the way that they feel like they're not managing the settlers, the Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And so this might be the second or third grouping of sanctions that Biden has used to go after them. So this is pretty significant to take an ally and sanction an ally's citizens.
Yeah. It's remarkable. These sanctions being imposed against entire outposts, entire settlements, as opposed to individuals, which is what makes this unique. And of course, Michael, we were talking about a temporary port, and we still are, by the way, a temporary pier or port in Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid. That says a lot about our situation right now with Israel. Senior American officials are telling Israel reportedly that they would support a targeted campaign in Rafah. And I think that's important, Michael. You can speak to the standoff over Rafah. The president has made it clear, Joe Biden to Benjamin Netanyahu, that that is a red line, that beginning an invasion without a plan to protect civilians in the city of Rafah is a non-starter. Are we seeing progress here then on what we're calling a targeted campaign?
I think so. I honestly was a little confused about what President Biden meant on MSNBC last weekend when he said going into Rafah at all was a red line. To me, that's what the Israelis have been saying for months, since October 7th, that they feel like they have to go after Hamas in all three sections of the Gaza Strip. We all knew that the bottom third, the Rafah operation, was next. And to say that, hey, we're not supporting Israel's war anymore, made no sense. The National Security Advisor came out 2 days later and said much of what you just quoted back to me just now, which is that we, the United States, would support a Rafah operation if it were done, I think, in sort of a narrowly tailored fashion and in a way where they could evacuate many of the Palestinians who were down in the south and allegedly sort of restrained there. So I think we are perhaps making progress with the Israelis, but I don't think the White House is winning much influence over the Israelis the more they seem to beat up Bibi Netanyahu.
Well, I guess that appears to be true. It's just interesting, Michael. We were told a lot about the ability for the Israeli military, this very capable fighting force, to use precision. We were told that they would not want to go into a dense area like Gaza City or now Rafah at the expense of civilians. But of course, we've seen more than 30,000 civilians die, and realizing that some of them may have been Hamas. You wonder if it's the strategy that's being employed or, in fact, the IDF's ability to be precise that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I was struck by an interview I heard where General Amos Yadlin, who is a dovish general but famous within Israel for some of his military exploits, he was describing exactly what the IDF is doing, which he thinks has no other precedent. And it's that it's an underground military. And he asked and he cited, how long did it take the Americans to destroy ISIS in Mosul when we were in Iraq? And the answer was 9 months. And General Yadlin is saying, you know, it's so much harder, but when you have no support from the international community and the terrorists in this case are actually underground. And we know, I think, that the Israelis are not always using their most precision weapons, and it's very hard to go after these tunnels, which have been more extensive than they realized. So there's all sorts of factors piling up on the IDF, and I think those are the reasons why you've seen so many unfortunate innocent Palestinian deaths.
We're spending time with Michael Allen from Beacon Global Strategies. It was just 2 days ago, Michael, that Hezbollah launched more than 100 missiles at Israeli military sites. We're not talking about it as often. How concerned should we be about a new front to the north?
I think we should be very, very concerned. Hezbollah is much more capable than Hamas. They have hundreds of thousands of medium range and longer range weapons. They have much more training and support from Iran than does Hamas. And so this is really something the Israelis are worried about, not only because it would be then a two-front war for Israel, and arguably more fronts than that when you consider the Houthi and you consider Iranian-backed groups in Syria and Iraq. But Hezbollah is so aggressive and has so many more capabilities to hold hostages, to raid into northern Israel. It's something they're very, very worried about. And I think it's something that we have to continue to watch. I still don't think it's over 50% that they're going to go in, Hezbollah, and try and start a war. But it is definitely significant enough that we should be watching it every day and trying to manage it. We, the United States, should be trying to manage that crisis into a safer place.
I've got less than a minute, Michael. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, wants to see Israel flooding the zone with food aid. That cannot be done without the military, correct?
That's exactly right. And I think, well, we all agree that we should be flooding the zone. The Israelis should be flooding the zone with humanitarian aid. But the point that the Israelis are trying to make to us over and over again is that it's not so much the quantity of the aid, it's that Hamas is taking control of that assistance once it's inside the boundaries of the Gaza Strip. That's what the Israelis are worried about, that Hamas is using it to reestablish power.
Michael Allen, it's great to have you back with Beacon Global Strategies, talking with us about the stakes in Israel, a political situation not getting easier for Joe Biden. This is Bloomberg.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Lithium deposit that is...
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
Just over the weekend, there was the horrific picture of the 10-year-old who starved to death on the front page of the New York Times, which is the most influential newspaper in Schumer's home state, and probably affected opinion among his core constituents and the people he talks to. So it's a sharp break. It's unusual, and it's very telling from the highest ranking Jewish elected official in the United States.
I don't know if this supplemental budget request for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan will ever see the light of day. The Senate has already passed it, but are we going to hear new calls for strings attached? I know there's a new effort to account for weapons that are going to Israel. Progressives want to see some kind of check on this.
I think it makes the whole process harder because it's unlikely that you're going to actually be able to add anything to it because it's already been through the Senate and time is kind of ticking. You're kind of past the time where you needed to get this to Ukraine. Right. So there will be an effort to get it done. but it probably on the margins hurts your ability to get progressive support unless there's something you can do outside the legislation to get their backing. At the same time, you've got a lot of Republicans who don't want to help Ukraine anymore.
Right.
So
here we are,
gotta
stuck
push
in
back.
the mud.
And they're on those two ideological edges.
You know, we had the
eating
Polish
away.
president here in our bureau a couple of days ago. Today, the Latvian prime minister is going to be with us. In fact, I invite our listeners and viewers to join us just about a half an hour from now. She will be here. It is not an accident that these leaders from Europe are coming to Washington to sit down with the speaker and make the case.
Yeah, and if you're in one of those Baltic republics, or if you're in Poland, you realize you don't really want Putin right on your border.
Yeah.
You know, for the United States, you can check Russia in Ukraine by supplying arms. If you're the next country down the road, it really makes sense to spend as much money to let the Ukrainians fight the fight for you.
Well, Mike Dorning, I thought we'd be talking about shutdown politics, and we've been rehearsing that pretty well over the past year or so.
It's a familiar topic.
Honest to God. Well, so let's get to it. It's a week from tomorrow. Already it's here. We don't have a plan yet. I'm not going to say the government is likely to shut down, but it does make you a little nervous when everyone stops talking about it. You know, it's like the movie when all the fish go away and you know the sharks are coming.
Yeah.
What are we in for next week?
I mean, I always say this, and I've kind of maybe jaundiced on this, but I think both the Democrats and the Republicans have shown they don't want to shut the government down. Now, maybe they're unable to reach an agreement on the rest of government, and they have to take the kick the can down the road approach.
But they're capable of doing that again.
But they have said we're not going to kick the can. We're not going to kick the can. Speaker, Johnson said it's unacceptable to kick the can. Yeah. And then you're like, do you kick the can? Do you shut the government down, or do you agree to something you don't want to? And you're like, we'll kick the can.
We're kicking it.
But they actually did reach an agreement on about a quarter of the government already.
Yes,
so they are making progress.
Well, you know what the conventional wisdom is. This is what you're supposed to write in your story when you put all the cliches in there. But of course, you're Mike Dorning, so you don't. It's that we already got the easy part done.
Well, you didn't get the easy part. You pushed off the harder. Oh, the easy part. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So now we're left with Pentagon, Homeland Security, Judiciary.
Yeah, that's the tougher part.
What? So we're going to crash into next Friday and get all of this done in time? At a certain point, when you're dancing on the edge, you could fall off.
You could, but you always have the kick the can down the road option. You remember, it's Congress. You make the deadlines. It's not like when you're a student and the teacher makes the deadlines.
Yeah.
But it is going to be hard to make that choice. But at some point, you have to. And in Washington, the way you force people to make tough decisions, often like in business, is you're up against a deadline. So they're up against another deadline. They don't want to stay over their Easter vacation and work more, and they don't want to kick the can down a road again. They'll have to reach an agreement.
We'll see if this is possible in a world in which we're talking about discharge petitions. I have to ask you about this because I'm sure it's upsetting the speaker. This is not to keep the government open. It brings us back to funding Ukraine and Israel. You've got a Democrat with one and a Republican with another. And by the way, one of them is live. It's getting a lot of signatures. I'll have to update the number for us in 1 second here. Does Speaker Johnson secretly hope that this happens so he doesn't have to deal with Ukraine?
I don't know what he secretly hopes.
This is the avenue around the speaker to get a bill to the floor, which we're told is highly unlikely, Mike.
Yeah, it ordinarily would be just a stunning act of disloyalty to the speaker, and it's only happened twice in the past 22 years. That said, there's been so many stunning acts of disloyalty to McCarthy and then Johnson, and they're messing everything up constantly for him. So it's just kind of par for the course in terms of stunning acts of disloyalty. So I don't think he would be as upset with it as other speakers would be. I don't know that he really wants people to do it and run around him, and I think he would like a voice in how far you go on the border disputes. But it is an alibi, at least for him.
Okay, could it provide cover if, say, he doesn't have 218, but you got 200 signatures on there? Say, look, guys, obviously this has gotten to a point. There's massive support. Let's just put it on the floor and see what happens.
I think you'd need like Republicans signing on to the Democratic one, or Democrats signing on to the Republican one.
Which might not happen.
Which might not happen. But as you know, Joe, in Washington, you start out with these two things. It's possible that, they tweak one to move a little in the direction of the other and they get more support. It shows you that there's real political pressure to get this done.
Yeah.
And members of Congress are responding to it. We know for sure that there's a clear majority of Congress that wants to do this. So that pressure is starting to force action. And it looks likely that some sort of action will be forced at some point in April.
Amazing. If they get this done next week, by the way, we should just reset the deck here. This is the rest of the fiscal year, right? This would bring us so we can start working on 2025.
Well, what it would bring us is to where we could start working on that Ukraine dispute you were just talking about.
But in terms of
because that's been put off
funding,
for all this.
Like, we wouldn't be resetting the clock likely for another 2 weeks here. If they get this done, it brings us to September 30.
Yes.
Maybe this Congress can actually deal with something else like Ukraine.
Like Ukraine, which it's been like trying to deal with for half a year, basically.
There's also a tax deal that we sat here a month ago and talked about and said, this is amazing. Who says they can't get something done? There was momentum. There was bipartisan support to essentially enhance the child tax credit for more favorable business taxes. Now it's DOA. Or it's on ice at least, because they want to change it in the Senate. Are we done here too?
Well, first off, this is like the contrast. It's not the dysfunctional House Republicans that are screwing that up. It's the normal election year politics in the Senate between the two parties, where no one wants to get, none of the Republicans want to give the Democratic president anything to run on or any new achievement in an election year, and the Democrats aren't necessarily going to give in to everything the Republicans want. So at the moment, it looks like they're at loggerheads. But that said, there is a lot of pressure from business and from progressive groups to do this. It's a deal that the middle likes as well.
Sure.
So it's not impossible that something on this could happen in April or so. It makes it a little weird and inconvenient that there's a tax deal happening after you've had to file your taxes.
It does, yeah.
So like to any normal person, it's like an absolutely crazy way to do it.
Working on that.
But in Washington, election year politics and partisanship clearly trumps like anything any normal human being would want.
The best part of this, for me, of this conversation that you see and hear every week on Balance of Power with Mike Dorning, is this is the exact same conversation that we have when we're in the newsroom or in the pantry. It's authentic. Thank you for being here, as always. Mike Dorning, helping guide our way through what's happening in Washington as we turn to Amy Morris for an update now on world and national news. For that, we turn to the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. SpaceX launched its massive Starship rocket for a third test flight this morning. It was cut short, though, after they lost the signal. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, though, says Elon Musk's private space company will chalk this up as a success.
The fact that they were able to launch the combined system, the booster and the spacecraft, they had a successful hot separation in that process. Starship traveled on its telemetry over to the Indian Ocean, and then it started to re-enter Earth's atmosphere.
Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow says the signal was lost at 65 kilometers altitude, and China is calling on the U.S. to stop, quote, unreasonably suppressing TikTok after the House overwhelmingly passed that bill to ban the viral video app in the U.S. unless its Chinese owner sells it. If and when it is for sale, former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he would be interested, telling CNBC he's putting together a group to consider purchasing the video platform. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
Today, I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
From the UK, and I'm the inventor of the Gel Razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the Gel Razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype, or manufacturing possibilities with investment, or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurize the handle. The gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blade, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the Gel Razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
We're concerned about their effort because it makes no sense. You know, their justification for it doesn't make any sense. They can't recruit a candidate because it doesn't make any sense. And ultimately, my firm, American Bridge, like, we're an opposition research group. We exist to, you know, dig up negative information about our political opponents, but they can't even get to that point where we have a political opponent. That's not to say we're not worried. It's a destructive campaign they want to wage, and it really only exists to reelect Donald Trump. There's no other justification for it. So we remain concerned, but, you know, they do eventually have to find us a candidate.
Rick Davis, Joe Lieberman, another national co-chair, is kind of the face of no labels at this point, told the Washington Post today they could still decide against a bid if they decide it will help elect Donald Trump. Doesn't all the research already point to that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the research we've seen from groups like Third Way, who've done extensive polling around this, they, I think, share Pat's view that this is a sort of, you know, Trump campaign in camouflage. I did think it was significant that Joe Lieberman, one of the founders of No Labels, came out very strongly about this fact that if they look like they're going to re-elect Donald Trump or elect Donald Trump, they would they'd pull out. And so that's the first real affirmative comments I've heard at this stage of the selection process that would indicate to me that they are starting to hear the criticism that's been lodged against them from Democrats especially. But at the end of the day, who knows if that means anything based on the trajectory they're on, which, as Pat also points out, is kind of hard to figure out because the process kind of keeps changing and the standards keep being modified. But at the end of the day, you know, it I don't think is going to result in much. The third way polling I described has a ticket, a conceptual ticket of Nikki Haley and Dean Phillips coming in fourth behind RFK. So, and RFK is only on one state. So, I mean, if you're not doing better than that, we may just be wasting a lot of our time even talking about them.
It is feeling more like that, I have to say. Pat, Joe Lieberman also said they plan to put a conservative at the top of the ticket to hurt Trump more than Biden. So what are we talking about here? Wasn't that the Republican primary?
Yeah, in theory, although there wasn't much of a primary there. Most folks were running on a platform of, oh, Donald Trump's a great guy, which, you know, I think we saw is not particularly effective. But, you know, the only way Donald Trump can win this election, he's looking at the same polling we're looking at, and that's to split the anti-Trump coalition. That is the only thing. So if you give anti-Trump people 2 people to vote for and let the pro-Trump people vote for 1 person, that gives them a mathematical advantage. So that's the only logical explanation for what they're talking about here. And, you know, everything else is just completely baffling. And look, I think they're finding out it's hard to run a political party. They're trying to run a shadow political party, and it's not simple.
It's not. As we also wait for news from RFK Jr. this week, Rick, he's got people talking about a potential vice presidential pick, and it would be a name from sports or entertainment/politics. And Jesse Ventura, we talked about this yesterday, or Aaron Rodgers. That's going to end up being the story, right? It's not going to be No Labels we're talking about in the middle of summer. It's going to be what to do about RFK Jr.
Yeah, it could well be. I mean, I don't think he's going to get on very many ballots. So you can only get votes if you're actually on the ballot. And even though he polls well, doesn't mean he gets votes. Little known fact, Jesse Ventura reached out to John McCain when we lost to George Bush in 2000 in the primary, suggesting that we launch an independent bid for president with the 2 of them on the ticket. And he was willing to be vice president on that ticket. So that was kind of at his height. I don't know what he's been doing for the last 20 years, but I wouldn't imagine that it's that attractive of a ticket to resurrect a Jesse Ventura independent campaign.
Pretty sure he's been hanging out in Mexico, if I remember correctly. Did you ever consider that, Rick? Or John McCain was going to run as a Republican, right?
There was a fleeting moment that I thought I could make a fortune off of the T-shirt sales off of that campaign, but I didn't think it ever had a chance to be successful politically.
The slogan, ain't got time to bleed. Pat, what's your take on RFK Jr.? Are you paying attention or not?
We're paying attention. He's dangerous. The nice thing about RFK, though, is, and you see this in the polling all the time, is the voters who like him the most are the voters who know the least about him. If a voter only knows his last name is Kennedy, they're far more likely to support him than when they learn a single thing about his personal life, his policy issues, his public persona. So for a group like mine in American Bridge, it is easy pickings. You just need to tell people about who he is, what he's done. And that's what we're focused on with him. But he is very dangerous.
Will the vice presidential pick matter? And I ask you that not in a serious policy sense, but he's going to get on TMZ. He's going to get in the magazines. It's going to be an entertainment pop culture story. People will watch it on TikTok. This is the kind of stuff that candidates wish they could pay for.
It will make news, and our job is to make sure that that news accurately portrays sort of what this ticket would be all about. You know, harming people by making it harder for them to get vaccines, a level of conspiracy level policy positions that I don't even want to repeat here. These are things that are dangerous in that they can create a lot of earned media, but are an opportunity in that they're, like I said, a real opportunity to teach voters about who this guy is and make sure that his attention does not translate into votes.
Fascinating and a great panel today. Pat Dennis and Rick Davis stay with us. They'll be back next hour following our conversation with the Prime Minister of Latvia. This is an important one that's coming up at the top of the hour. Evika Salina is in our bureau today in Washington and will be joining us in just about 10 minutes' time when Kaylee comes in. The matter of TikTok is something we need to talk about. Divest or ban? We spent time on it yesterday. It passed the House, and now it's going to the Senate, where we're told life could be a lot more difficult, especially with the Donald Trump wild card and a lot of very well-paid lobbyists out there. Kate Ackley is joining to get into this from Bloomberg Government, senior reporter. She's had her finger on this and took us to school last evening on balance of power. When it comes to all of the tentacles touching this story, Kate, are we thinking that this will not be able to pass the Senate? Is this story already over?
It's definitely not over yet. No, not at all. But, TikTok has been scrambling all of its lobbyists, the ones who are sort of disclosed and we know about. The company spent, over $8 million in sort of disclosed, registered federal lobbying last year. And some of the people on the team have Senate ties. I mean, we got former senators. Remember Senator John Breaux, a Democrat from Louisiana, Senator Trent Lott, a Republican from Mississippi. They're both on the team. And one of my colleagues ran into Trent Lott just the other day at one of the coffee shops on Capitol Hill, inside the Capitol complex. So they're up there, they're working it. But this is definitely the bill itself, the fate of the bill in the Senate is not a done deal, but its sort of failure in the Senate is also not a done deal. This is very much a live issue. And of course, we have all the TikTok influencers and users. They're also mobilizing. They've been on the Hill this week to try to sway this issue as well.
Are they calling you? Are you hearing from the influencers? Are they singing in your office, Kate, to try to get you to cover them?
They haven't called me, but I went to the press conference this week on Capitol Hill, organized by some Democrats who have voted against the bill and who were against it in the House. And so I did talk to some of those influencers who had flown in, they said at their own expense, to be here, to talk to lawmakers, to talk to reporters, to talk to people on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, fascinating. You're an expert on lobbying here in Washington, and we look to you at times like these, following the very successful lobbying effort to snuff out a couple of bills a year ago. There's another one underway now in the Senate. Kate, what's happening there?
With TikTok or with something? Which bill do you mean?
With TikTok, very specifically, yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes. I mean, I think that's with the overwhelming passage in the House that obviously had some momentum, and we saw Republican leaders yesterday. They're up at their retreat, saying we're going to put pressure on the Senate to take up this bill, to pass this bill. We've seen bipartisan senators say that they want to take up the House bill, pass it, but there are competing bills in the Senate, so that complicates things. And certainly there's a big pressure campaign from TikTok lobbyists, from other, people aligned with TikTok, to put pressure on the Senate not to move the House bill, maybe to move something, but not to move the House bill. And so it's probably always easier to stop legislation than to get legislation, through Congress. That's just a given. But even in these really divisive times, to have such an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote that came out of the House, you just don't see that kind of bipartisanship. It is an effort. It's not a slam dunk for this to get stopped in the Senate.
Understood. The reaction from Chuck Schumer yesterday seemed to be telling, as he gave us a very straight-faced, single-line statement acknowledging the fact that this happened in the House and they're going to wait for it in the Senate. This is one of these deals, though, Kate, where we see progressives and conservatives singing from the same hymnal. And that's something we saw in the House, but even more so here in the Senate. Can you talk to how the two-party extremes agree on this?
Yeah, and I think this isn't the only issue, and where you have these sort of alliances between the populist progressives and then the populist conservatives. This doesn't even exactly cut along those ideological lines, but you do see this very, very strange, uncommon allies coming together on this. And, I think it just shows that when it comes to tech policy, free speech, concerns about China, you can take this to artificial intelligence as well, that the standing ideological lines don't necessarily hold up in some of these emerging debates. People aren't necessarily just in their partisan corners, and they might have different reasons for their opposition or support. For example, for the TikTok legislation, we heard from progressives, who said that TikTok provides a voice and a community for people of color, for LGBTQ. That's not the reason that conservatives are saying they want to support it. So you see common ground, but coming from different perspectives.
Well, Kate, keep your eyes on the money for us. We want to keep this conversation going with Kate Ackley at Bloomberg Government. Kaylee Lyons is on the way in next. Hour 2 starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
NATO's chief calls on European countries to ramp up support for Ukraine even as the debate continues here in Washington. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Jens Stoltenberg presents an annual report from the alliance. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines here in Washington. And Kaylee, the push continues from this administration on funding for Ukraine with another foreign leader in town today to help make the case.
Yeah, the Prime Minister of Latvia is here in Washington. She will, in fact, be with us in studio this hour, just a few minutes from now, to speak with us about what NATO is seeing in Eastern Europe, the defense of allies and neighbors of Ukraine, as it's still very much a question whether or not Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, is going to be sending billions of dollars of more aid from the U.S. to Ukraine's cause.
Yeah, that's for sure. With elections now looming in Russia and a restless Vladimir Putin, we have a lot to talk about with the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. But first, though, we got to get a check on the markets. And as always, Charlie Pellet has that for us from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kelly and Joe. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. I'm going to throw in the Russell 2000 because that is clearly the underperformer today. Small cap shares trading down. We've got the Russell 2000 dropping 1.8%. Let's give you some context. The S&P down now by 0.4%, falling 22 points on the S&P right now at 51.43. The Dow also lower by 136 points. Dow Industrial slumping now by about 0.4%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 70, a decline now of 0.4%. NASDAQ 100 Index, full of those big tech names, also lower now by roughly 0.4%. 10-year 4.28% with a 2-year 4.68%. Spot gold lower by $16 the ounce. Right now we've got the precious metal trading at $21.58. Gold down 0.7%. Crude surging 2.3% right now. West Texas Intermediate crude with an 81 handle, 81.55 a barrel on WTI, and Bitcoin down 2.8%, 71,122 right now on Bitcoin. President Biden is calling for United States Steel to retain American ownership amid moves by Nippon Steel to purchase the Pittsburgh-based company. The announcement came as Biden campaigns in Michigan and Wisconsin, two Midwestern industrial strongholds that are crucial for him to win the November election. Right now, U.S. Steel down 1.7%. Nippon, the ADR, is down 3.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Kaylee Lines and Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much, making an excellent point about President Biden focusing on domestic politics with another trip to the swing state of Michigan today, certainly keeping an eye on union workers, and that's evidenced by his statement on the U.S. Steel deal. But as we know, this president also has a watchful eye, as always, on foreign policy. It was something he led his State of the Union address with last Thursday, just a week ago today, pleading with Congress to pass additional aid for Ukraine. And of course, the president also has been meeting with foreign leaders in Washington this week on that issue. We caught up with one of them, the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, after his trip to the White House earlier this week. And he talked about the consequence if more aid for Ukraine does not come, what Russia could then do next. Take a listen to what he told us.
We are the nation who was enslaved by Russia several times. If Russia wins the war in Ukraine, if Putin wins the war in Ukraine, he will attack one more time. He will attack other states because this is Russian imperialism reborn, and it is greedy. It will be willing to attack further. That is why it has to be stopped. It has to be blocked, and it has to be punished. And this is the most important task that is facing the community of the West today.
And that is where we begin our conversation with Ivica Salina, the Prime Minister of Latvia, is now with us in studio. And Prime Minister, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us today at Bloomberg. Is your time spent in Washington today meeting with lawmakers on Capitol Hill to make the case for funding in Ukraine?
You know, I am here showing my gratitude towards Ukrainian people because I believe they're fighting not just for Europeans, but for Americans as well. So that's why I see it's important that when we look to transatlantic relations, we could see those democratic values and liberties be met. That's why, for sure, I hope there will be this decision about help to Ukraine, because it's at utmost importance to my country, to Europe, to Ukrainians, that those promises and those international values we all are agreed some time ago, we can still be holding very high on our priorities.
Well, it still, though, remains very much a question whether or not Congress has that same view, whether or not continuing to provide aid for Ukraine is necessary. What is Latvia's concern about if the aid for Ukraine does not come through to the same extent it has over the course of the war thus far? If Ukraine does not win this, what happens to your country? What do you fear would happen?
You know, our country is struggling like living in a house with an alcoholic neighbor. And I would say Russia is this alcoholic or drug addict neighbor. You never know what he will do next. So you can do your homework, you can protect your door, as Latvia has done. We're spending almost 3% of our GDP to our military and defense. We are giving Ukraine help, almost of 0.25 for military capabilities. But we know that without our allies working together, Ukraine cannot succeed in a speed we all wanting. It means that NATO countries can get under the target of Russia. So why are we ready for that? I don't think so, because maybe from the perspective of Washington, it seems Ukraine and Russia is far away. But if Russia wins, those consequences will affect all the world, also Washington, also United States. Not just Europe will be affected by this result of the conflict.
You're marking 20 years as a member of NATO in Latvia, which is a remarkable moment for you. And Jens Stoltenberg is asking for more. He spoke earlier to reporters, the Secretary General, asking for European nations to increase their commitment, to increase aid to Ukraine. What is Latvia prepared to do? What are your neighbors?
Connection lost.
We have helped Ukraine since the beginning of the war, even before. Latvians were the first who gave military aid to Ukraine, and that's why Kiev is free from Russians. And we know that we will be doing more. As I mentioned before, we are already giving 0.25% of our GDP military aid. We are leading drone coalition together with the United Kingdom, helping Ukraine to fight with Russia with drones, because it can substitute artillery in some cases. And there are many other countries joining this drone coalition. We will be the ones who will be participating in the Czech platform, buying artillery for Ukraine now, because they really need this artillery now. We cannot let Russia win this war, because it will be not just Russia, it will be China as well. So we have to understand those links are interconnected, and then we can lose the values democratic states share all around the world. We are democracies, and democracy is costly.
You mentioned that you are joining that Czech effort to get more artillery shells to Ukraine, something we know is desperately needed. Europe's promises to deliver more shells to Ukraine have not happened on the timeline at which they initially said. How else can that ammunition be sourced? What other countries might be able to provide it? How can you go about getting it to Ukraine in the more immediate term?
That's why we are joining this Czech platforms. They are ready to buy from third countries outside Europe, and we know that there will be many European countries joining this initiative. We are looking towards India, maybe some other countries where we can find those artillery which we are not yet able to produce ourselves in Europe. The fact is that in Europe we are not able to produce so much as it is needed for Ukraine right now. That's why help from allies such as United States is very important, not just because we cannot do something that's technically not possible in such a speedy way. And I believe it is doable if we can act together, if we can act together on a united decision.
It appears likely that Vladimir Putin will win another term as president this weekend. I'm not sure how much time will be spent counting votes, Prime Minister. But do you believe that it is his goal to reconstitute the Soviet Union?
You know, it's hard to analyze what Putin thinks because, you know, he's been a leader of that country, a neighboring country of Latvia and Baltic states for quite a long time. And what I have seen, this country has become more desperate, less liberty, less human rights, less opportunities for freedom of speech. And I believe he has some crazy ideas in his mind if we can see what really happened with the war in Ukraine. So I can just imagine if he will have a sense that those democratic states have some crack in the wall and they are not as strong as we can act together, I believe he can use his crazy ideas and try to threaten and try to fear other countries in Europe, as well as it could be unpredictable.
So that's the Russian president and a Russian election. We have an election of our own here in the United States coming up in November, where also unpredictability was somewhat of a feature of the previous administration. And we have heard former President Trump, who of course is likely to be the Republican nominee, he has the number of delegates to be the nominee come July, suggest that when it comes to NATO countries who aren't paying their fair share, I know that Latvia is above the quota, but that Putin could do whatever the hell he wants to those countries. How much does that rhetoric concern you? Do you fear the prospect of another Trump administration?
You know, during election time, this procedure could be very messy, and maybe it's even good that sometimes it's messy, because in Russia there is no even messy time. We just already know the results. So at least in democratic states, we have a lot of very strong discussions. Latvia sees United States as a very strong, our transatlantic ally. We have learned from you a lot, and we would like to do it in next upcoming years as well. So for sure, we will be working with any administration, but for us, it is very important that NATO alliance is strong, that those articles which are written down to NATO alliance, that they have been kept alive. Because otherwise, it is really a big, big threat for our countries, for our democracies.
Well, we're talking about a potential two-tiered alliance if there is another Trump administration, where those who do not pay enough will not be protected under Article 5. Would a Trump administration be the end of NATO as we know it?
You know, I have negotiated with some of people out of White House, and I believe there is a strong belief in the values of NATO. Nevertheless, how maybe publicly some messages have been said, and I still believe in united consensus of NATO. Otherwise, we will weaken ourselves, and we will weaken not just NATO, we will weaken our countries. That's why Latvia will work with any administration, and we will have a strong belief that your elections will be good. And I wish your people good elections, a good process in that. I really understand it, but I hope that we will not let down NATO alliance.
Of course, when we think about the NATO alliance, Ukraine is not a member of that alliance. Ukraine is not entitled, obviously, because they're fighting a war with Russia, to the same protections that Article 5 provides, which is that other members of the alliance will even put boots on the ground if necessary in order to defend you as a country. But we've heard Europeans suggest, French President Emmanuel Macron essentially said it wouldn't be off the table necessarily to see boots on the ground in Ukraine if it became necessary. Would Latvia ever be willing to do that? You've talked about all that you are providing to Ukraine in terms of drones, in terms of other spending, obviously, effort to get artillery shells. But would it ever be men? Could there reach a point in which that becomes necessary?
I would love to have a NATO's opinion on this particular step forward, because I believe in NATO. I believe in those procedures and analysis what our military personnel has done. And that's why I really see that if there could be some training necessary, yes, we could move it to Ukraine as well. And there could be different, diversions of what does it really mean, boots on the ground. because this proposal was not probably very well prepared among the other countries participating in the meeting. I was as well in Paris on that evening, but we reached one good outcome of that meeting, and it was this Czech platform where we all decided that we can buy artillery, what Ukraine needs right now, and that was a good outcome. So sometimes maybe there are some ideas our leaders want to show, and I believe Macron just wanted to show a leadership. And what we all really need, we need to be strong leaders of our countries to really move fast and to make decisions which can help Ukraine. What Ukraine asks, we have to give them.
If the funding does not come from the U.S., which is unknown at this point, we're talking about $60 billion. It's been made clear to us that that could not be replaced by Europe. Do you worry in that hypothetical situation that Latvia's borders would be at risk?
We are at hybrid attacks every day. We have been experiencing weaponization of migration to our borders from Belarus and Russia. So we are fighting already every day with those threats Russia is giving to Europe. And we have been very informed about what's going on our borders and how Russia want to do maybe threaten our people, but we have been doing a lot. We built a fence on the border of Belarus and Russia, but we know that we as Europeans need to do more in military industry. So in any case, Europe will change the perspective of how we see our military capabilities. If United States will not give this aid, it will be very worse upset of circumstances for Ukraine. And I believe the outcome of this situation could be as well as not good for United States as well, because you have been leaders of democracy, superpower, for quite a long time. Why do you think someone else would not want to step in if they see there is not this strong leadership towards aid to Ukraine?
All right, Latvian Prime Minister Alika Savina, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time for joining us here in Washington, and good luck for the rest of your trip. And Joe, this is, of course, as we hear the Prime Minister talking about the U.S.'s role as a leading global democracy, the place in the world, this is something that President Biden has consistently brought up. It's just not exactly clear to what extent that message may be resonating with those in Congress who currently have the power to decide whether or not this funding continually is going to be provided to Ukraine.
He talks about frequently his visit to his first G7 as president, when his message was, America is back. And the first question he got was, for how long? And that is something that we're asking legitimately in this case with conversations like these. So thanks again to the Prime Minister, in a conversation you'll only see and hear here on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. A lot more to follow. We'll assemble our panel coming up next for their take on our conversation on the fastest show in politics, on the radio and on TV. Only this is Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lows of the day right now on the S&P 500 index down 28 points to 51.37. Drop right now of 0.5%. We've got the Dow down 192 points for the Dow Industrials, down 0.5%. NASDAQ, the composite index, down 87 now, drop there of 0.5%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares now down by 2%. Another hot inflation report this morning reinforced bets that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates. The 10-year 4.28% with a 2-year right now 4.68%. We've got gold, spot gold down $12 the ounce, down 0.5%, 21.62. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, 81.43 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin 71,018. Bitcoin today down 2.9%. The Biden administration is offering a $2.26 billion loan to help Lithium Americas Corp develop a Nevada lithium deposit that is the country's largest. Shares of Lithium Americas, they're up now by 10.7%. And briefly, Bitcoin has topped Taylor Swift and Beyonce in Google searches. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now in Washington. Once again, your hosts, Kaylee Lyons and Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. You made it to Little Friday here on Bloomberg Radio and TV. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington as we assemble our panel with an eye on the campaign trail. Joe Biden moving on to Michigan as he leans into blue-collar workers to preserve the blue wall that so many of us refer to in his victory in 2020. And with us today, Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and of course, Republican strategist along for the ride as we consider what the president is up to here. Rick is joined today by Pat Dennis at American Bridge, Democratic analyst. It's great to see you both. Pat, talk to us about Joe Biden in Michigan. He's trying to appeal to unionized workers who have a history for voting for Donald Trump. And it doesn't seem that becoming the first president to walk the picket line is enough to pull them into the fold. What does he have to tell them today?
Well, nobody said this campaign's going to be easy, but I think the most important thing we see here is that Joe Biden's there. He's doing the work. He's focused on these states in particular, these Great Lakes states. My organization, American Bridge, these, three sort of Great Lakes states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, we've identified as, all the swing states are important, but those three in particular for us are like the key place to focus on. And these voters too. So he needs to be talking to them. He needs to be communicating with them. That's what he's doing. But also he's doing what Donald Trump couldn't do, which is delivering the infrastructure funds from the infrastructure bill that Donald Trump only ever talked about. And Joe Biden went and got done, and in a bipartisan manner, I should mention.
Yeah, Biden did talk about that in the State of the Union address, talking about lawmakers who didn't vote for that bill but still cheer when the money comes, and made a joke about if anyone didn't want the money in their districts, just to let him know about that. But as we hear about this blue wall, it's not just Michigan where he is now. Pennsylvania, also his home state, critical, obviously, Rick. And I wonder to what extent it is the knowledge of battleground Pennsylvania and the steelworking presence there that prompted President Biden to issue a statement on the U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel deal, essentially saying this needs to stay in American hands. The quote from the president, "I told our steel workers I have their backs and I mean it." And Rick, we already know CFIUS was looking at this deal. There was potentially national security concerns, but is this really about national security or is this about politics?
Well, these days, everything seems to be about national security. Social media is national security. Electric vehicles are national security, and now steel is national security. And so if this isn't the most national security conscious administration in history, I wouldn't imagine who to compare it to. Bottom line is this is super consistent, with the Biden administration, whether you look at it through a lens of antitrust or protectionism. But the bottom line is, as you point out, this is an election year, and it's all about votes in Pennsylvania. And I must say, he's got a much bigger challenge, according to the surveys, in Pennsylvania than he does in Michigan. And so this is really critical, not just to be able to reassure voters that he's going to keep jobs there, ownership's going to not change in his watch. But when you look at the national security implications, we don't have any more important ally in the Pacific than Japan. They are critical to our strategy in Indo-PACOM. And so it's really a two-edged sword for the Biden administration. He taketh with the steel business, but he has to give it away to one of our greatest allies in competition against China. So I think they're caught in a bit of a wedge now. The idea that this is anything other than a pretty, sort of smart domestic political play, I think is sort of exaggeration at this point.
Well, people waking up today in Michigan, where the president is, Pennsylvania, aforementioned, and Wisconsin are going to watch a 30-second ad if they sit through the break, and they're going to see men dressed in camouflage with the bright orange hunting gear, carrying rifles, going out to hunt. And the voiceover is talking about the infrastructure deal and the CHIPS Act, Pat. This is a new 7-figure ad by the Laborers International Union of North America. Does this stuff actually work?
Absolutely. And, my organization is currently focused on, finding real people in these states who we don't script our ads, and we sit down and talk to people and talk about how important these things are and how it matters to people, and put that on TV. And that's the most effective way to do it. So that's what this ad you're talking about is. And it's a real winning strategy that we believe in, too.
Well, Pat, as we consider this is a week ago today that President Biden was giving the State of the Union address. Now he's doing all of these swing state trips. He's done several just over the course of the last week. There's advertising being spent. We know he is sitting on a massive pile of money as well. He's done well with fundraising, and yet we haven't really seen any shift in polling post-State of the Union, as you typically might expect a little bump. So how hard is he going to have to work for a bump when his approval rating is historically the lowest of any incumbent president at this time in modern history?
We're all going to have to be working real hard. And these things, Rome wasn't built in a day. You need to make the case over time, consistently, with consistent, principled communication. And I think a great example is what he's doing with steelworkers right now. It is part of a pattern with Joe Biden where you see it with the CHIPS Act as well, where there are important considerations of bringing these jobs back, onshoring these jobs. There's the national security aspect of it, but there's also just, you need a strong American industry to do that. I think that message is really going to resonate, and it stands in incredible contrast to somebody like Donald Trump, who, people forget about this, but had the opportunity to build his towers in Chicago and in Las Vegas with American steel, and actually went and got a deal and bought all this steel from China and said, what about those American steelworkers? So this is going to be a really important message, and you need to follow it up with action, and that's what Joe Biden's doing.
Well, Rick, the White House is touting today, I guess the White House, and by way of the campaign, the first stop by a president or vice president to an abortion clinic. Kamala Harris meeting with abortion providers today in Minneapolis with some very delicate optics here for an issue that is clearly favoring Democrats at the polls right now. Is this a little too on the nose for you, or is this smart politics?
Oh, I think it's probably smart politics. I mean, we've seen over time, last 50 years, the abortion issue ebb and flow in importance to the American electorate. It's not always as intense as it was right after the Supreme Court had the Dobbs ruling and threw out Roe v. Wade. We saw a spike in people's attitudes toward abortion. Up until that point in time, it was languishing toward the bottom of the issue scale. So this is one way to try and get it back up there. They know, Democrats do, that they can generate intensity with their voter base. They're unlikely to change voters' minds, but that intensity is critical in an election year where, frankly, the majority of Americans don't like either candidate or aren't enthusiastic about this race. So I think that using the vice president in a fashion that somehow might be helpful to their political outcomes, number one, is important because it's an asset that Trump doesn't have right now. And two, abortion is, I think, one of the critical issues for creating some kind of excitement amongst Democratic voters.
So is this the best use of Vice President Harris? Is this the best issue for Vice President Harris, Rick?
Well, it's not immigration. We started this administration.
Yeah, that was her first assignment.
that didn't work out so well. So sure, I think this is probably a good issue for her. It is a significantly important issue to Democrats, and so I would anticipate Joe Biden himself taking a role in this process of bringing abortion more to the front of the line on a political issue campaign. I can imagine there'll be some significant advertising around it, probably closer to the fall. But the bottom line is that, they got to find something for the vice president to do that doesn't cross-pressure voters who don't like her, and this is probably a safe bet.
Well, she's got more than that going in the portfolio. Pat, she'll be meeting on Friday with 3 people who have been pardoned for cannabis offenses. Rick just mentioned immigration. My goodness, is there anything else that Joe Biden can saddle her with that would make her life more difficult?
Oh, I'm going to disagree with you there a little bit.
Yeah?
I think that issue in particular is really an important cross-cutting issue that you see. I'm a guy who looks at a lot of polls, and you see, across parties, a real belief that there were injustices around, the prosecutions around cannabis, especially in, states where it's now illegal. And that is, to me, a gimme. That's an easy one. That's a place where there are a lot of Republicans who just don't want to talk about it. And it's also a very important issue in, sort of blue-collar communities and cuts across parties. So I think that's a good one. And to build on what Rick was saying a little bit, on the abortion issue, just to go back, it's voters, we don't necessarily need to change their mind. This is a place where you look at these focus groups, and these voters have incredibly nuanced views, right? And those views time and time and time again say, I have this view, I've thought about this, I've made healthcare decisions with my family, and don't you tell me what to do. Even if they are somebody who leans more, pro-life on that issue, like the reason we're winning on this is because people have put a lot of thought into it.
All right, Pat Dennis, American Bridge president and Democratic strategist, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now we want to get a check on world and national news. Amy Morris has that for our 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kaylee, former President Trump is in court at this hour, or at least his legal team is. The federal judge is hearing arguments on motions focused on dismissing charges brought by special counsel Jack Smith. Now, this case centers around Donald Trump's handling of classified documents after his presidency and his resistance to the government's attempts to retrieve those materials that he took to his Florida residence. SpaceX mega rocket Starship blasted off on another test flight from Texas, but contact with that spacecraft was lost at the end of the hour-long trip. The company said it lost the signal from Starship as it neared its goal, a splashdown in the Indian Ocean. Now, today's launch outperformed the previous 2 tests, which exploded just minutes into the flights. No people were on board today's test flight. A Japanese high court has ruled denying same-sex marriage is unconstitutional and called for urgent government action to address the lack of any law allowing for such unions. The court does not have the power to overturn the current marriage law, which has been interpreted to restrict marriage as between a man and a woman. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are at just about the worst level of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. The S&P down 26, a drop right now of 0.5%. Dow Industrials slumping as well, also down 0.5% lower right now by 195 points. The Nasdaq Composite Index is down 70 for Nasdaq, a drop right now of 0.4%. The underperformer by far, Russell 2000, it is slumping now by 1.9%. Another hot inflation report is reinforcing bets that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates, even as some areas of the economy show signs of sluggishness. The 10-year 4.29% with a 2-year 4.68%. Spot gold down $13 the ounce, gold down 0.6%. A rally for crude up 2.1%. West Texas Intermediate 81.35 a barrel, and Bitcoin now slumping by 3.2%, 70,788 now on Bitcoin. President Biden is calling for United States Steel Corp to retain American ownership amid moves by Nippon Steel to purchase the Pittsburgh.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Ratio.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do three things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
To flip their house or move anywhere unless they really have to. I did get into this on the Big Take DC podcast with Bloomberg Federal Reserve team leader Kate Davidson. Have a listen to what we talked about.
As if it wasn't hard enough to manage what they've called the soft landing, right? They're trying to make sure inflation comes all the way back down to a level they think is healthy or is appropriate for a healthy economy. They're trying to do that without causing a big downturn in the labor market, without having tons of layoffs. Layered on top of that is this election. The Fed and Jay Powell will always say, and they emphasize over and over and over again, that the election and the politics of these decisions, they are just not a factor. They are looking purely at what's best for the economy.
What we talked about yesterday in this podcast episode that comes out today is how all eyes are on the Fed. And Powell did a 3-hour hearing last week on Wednesday, another 3-hour hearing in the Senate last week on Thursday. And it sounded like lawmakers were remarking on the potential for politicization, saying to Jay Powell, we don't think you're going to let that happen. And to me, it sounds like, hey, buddy, we're watching you.
It's interesting. We talked to Kate around those hearings on this very program here with so many questions about where we're going to be. Jay Powell, you made the point that his job is on the line. Joe Biden is going to want to keep him in the fold, I suspect, if he's reelected. Does that imply that he's not going to be tweeting at him and acting like Trump as we get closer to voting?
More than that is implying that, right? Joe Biden has really tried to restore what Trump kind of disrupted. You know, Trump came and in the 2018 onward, 2017 onward, he started talking more and more about the Federal Reserve and talking about monetary policy, and that broke a quarter-century-long tradition of the Fed, of the executive branch, staying out of the lane of the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. Biden came and he wanted to restore that. So we shouldn't see him tweeting about it. We shouldn't actually see him commenting and saying, you betcha we're going to see that building over there cut interest rates, but he said it anyway. Powell's job is on the line in the sense that his term will be up, and Trump has already said, I'm not going to reappoint him. Biden, by tradition, and the fact that he does follow tradition, would probably want to re-up him. I do have to ask, does Powell want the job?
Very good question, especially when you're sitting through hearings like he had to do
God knows.
Last
Why
week.
Would you?
Stamina and patience is what
that.
is required, I think, in addition to all of the other economic knowledge you have to have. Saleha Mosen, host of the Big Take DC podcast, thank you so much. And of course, it comes out today. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, anywhere else you get your podcast. You can download the Balance of Power podcast as well while you're at it, because we keep you up to date on all these things happening here in Washington. And this week, we've been talking a lot about TikTok because the House of Representatives, with a massive bipartisan margin, passed a bill yesterday that would see it banned in the United States if ByteDance, its Chinese owner, does not divest it. Will it pass in the Senate, though? That's a very different question. And certainly TikTok is trying to make sure that doesn't happen. There is a big lobbying effort underway, including TikTok CEO Shou Chew making a visit to senators on Capitol Hill and reiterating a pretty similar message. We heard from him on this. Take a listen.
Over the last few years, we have invested to keep your data safe and our platform free from outside manipulation. We have committed that we will continue to do so. We will continue to do all we can, including exercising our legal rights, to protect this amazing platform that we have built with you.
Enter Stephen Mnuchin. What you say? Remember, this is a divest or ban bill.
Yes. Or.
That for 6 months you get to divest TikTok. And all day yesterday we said, well, who would buy it? Who could do this in time? Stephen Mnuchin, the former Treasury Secretary who's been known to make interesting plays here in the investment world, raises his hand today, tells another network, Kaylee, that he will buy TikTok from its Chinese parent company. The problem is China has to approve that.
Right.
That's not going to happen, is it?
Right. This also would be a pretty pricey acquisition for the record.
What's it
Tens
worth?
of
Do we
billions
know?
of dollars. Bloomberg Intelligence estimates upward of $40 billion, potentially more for
this
the
is
U.S. business. It wouldn't be
Twitter all
cheap. He
over
would need other investors to get in
Yeah.
on this. But again, to your point, it also requires the sign-off of China. So we wanted to turn to a China expert. Anna Ashton is joining us now. Ashton Analytics founder, former Department of Defense intelligence officer. Anna, great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I guess it doesn't even really matter whether or not the Senate passes it or Biden signs it if China's not going to go along with it, right? Will China let this happen?
I mean, that is a really good question, Kaylee. And I think the algorithm that makes TikTok so powerful and so compelling to users is the reason that the U.S. government is worried about the national security concerns surrounding TikTok. It's the reason why personal data that TikTok may be collecting would be problematic if it were put in the hands of the Chinese government. And it's the reason why the Chinese government might not want to allow such a sale to go through. That algorithm is a Chinese invented algorithm. And that's the kind of thing that gives Chinese companies an edge, or certainly this Chinese company an edge over U.S. competitors. So it's not clear that they would sell it. Then again, or that they would allow it. Then again, it's not clear that they wouldn't. I think we just have to wait and see.
So I guess the question becomes, what's worse for Beijing? If they did not clear a deal like that, does China want to see TikTok banned in the U.S., or is China smart enough to know that these kids will VPN around anything and find that app anyway?
I think it's more the latter, Joe. I mean, I think, TikTok was banned in India, and the Chinese government didn't really lift a finger to stop that. I don't think that the Chinese government necessarily will lift a finger to stop a TikTok ban in the U.S. This is, the parent company ByteDance is a private sector company, and at the end of the day, this is not one of the strategic industries that the Chinese government has designated for attention and subsidies and investment.
Well, speaking of strategic industries, obviously there are the U.S. government, specifically those in Congress who are supportive of this measure, have said this is all about national security risk, just like the Biden administration, when doing things like imposing export controls, says this is about national security risk. Rick Davis, one of our Bloomberg Politics contributors, was basically laughing at the idea that everything seems to be about national security these days in Washington. What poses the greatest national security risk coming from China? Is it about access to data like this, or is it about critical materials, critical minerals, semiconductors, actual technology that's going to power the future?
I would argue that, China's hold on critical minerals, which is, it has a virtual monopoly on a lot of them, is a more significant national security risk in an adversarial relationship between the U.S. and China than, the fact that the parent company of this wildly popular social media platform is a Chinese company. But, I think that the concerns around TikTok are both about access to data that users may be providing to the platform, and about the potential for the platform to be used to push propaganda to U.S. users. And there have been some studies done on that that could lead you to conclude that the platform is biased, but, are not definitive.
Well, so Anna, are you surprised that this is running into headwinds in the Senate after all the talk and the bluster from both sides of the aisle when it comes to China? The China Select Committee has obviously been driving the conversation in the House, but this is not new for the leadership or the rank and file in the Senate. What seems to be the holdup?
It's not new. And I think, there are First Amendment concerns. There are a lot of voters who would be pretty ticked off if they were no longer able to run their businesses on the TikTok platform, or with the use of the TikTok platform, no longer able to communicate via the TikTok platform. Those users have inundated Congress with calls at the request of TikTok itself. And I think that there's a real consideration about voters in an election year. So there's both the consideration that somehow the platform might be used to influence voters, in one way or another, and tilt the campaigns, tilt the election, and the concern that voters might be turned off by candidates who support a ban. So it's tricky politics, and sort of no surprise that it's been pushed forward during such a big election year, and also no surprise that there's uncertainty around where it's going to go.
She's the founder of Ashton Analytics, former Department of Defense intelligence officer. Anna Ashton, great to have you back with us, Anna. Thank you for the insights. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, alongside Kaylee Lyons, as we prepare to point things to New York at World Headquarters, where Bloomberg Business Week is just about to tip off. Tim Stenevec is standing by, Carol Masser too. Tim, we're talking about TikTok in Washington almost as much as you guys are.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about TikTok in Washington, and former Treasury Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin also a little later on the program. We're also going to be talking about that mixed batch of economic data that we got. We're going to be checking in with Daniel Hornung, Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. He's going to join us with that and more.
All right, looking forward to the show. Tim Stenevec and Carol Masser coming up in just a few minutes. Meantime, I'll be back for Balance of Power at 5 p.m. Eastern.
I'll miss you. I'll be
Joe's
back
got a big
tomorrow.
event to go to.
We're going to swap a couple things around. Absolutely.
So make sure to join us then, or join me then.
That's right. Thanks for being with us on the radio and on TV. With Kaylee, I'm Joe. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on Bloomberg Radio and television and on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser along with Tim Stenivek. Let's get to the setup on this Thursday, on this 3/14, a.k.a. Pi Day.
Did you see the SpaceX folks celebrating Pi Day earlier?
Why not?
Yeah.
Bunch of engineers and scientists.
I didn't bring you a
It's
pie.
not that
I'm
kind
sorry.
of pie.
But that's what they were doing.
Okay.
It can be that kind of pie.
It's
Every
also
day's a pie day.
the number that never ends. All right, pie, not something the Fed's probably going to consider at next week's Fed meeting. Having said that, yesterday and today's read on inflation reports and more, that they are likely to consider. And on that, the trade stocks down off their lows, though. Yields along the U.S. Treasury curve, they are higher, Tim.
Well, also top of mind, that mixed batch of U.S. economic data. Inflation is still an issue. A weak read on the consumer we got as well. On that, we're going to be joined by Daniel Hornung, Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. We're going to talk about all that stuff and more with him in just a minute.
Yeah, our Mike McKee here along as well to break down the numbers. And wait, thought global battles were about technology and semiconductors and AI?
That's it.
So
Nothing
why
else.
is President Biden kind of crazy over steel? Maybe not crazy, but he's got some really strong thoughts when it comes to U.S. steel.
Okay, well,
and
speaking
who
of
should own
the
it.
battle over technology, the latest on TikTok's future, former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin gathering a group of investors to buy TikTok just after making that investment in New York Community Bank last week.
We've also got the intersection of sports and culture with the CEO of SMAC Entertainment, the latest episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and our own Jason Kelly, and then one more thing.
Okay, Pi Day. I said SpaceX, a success for them, a third major test flight for SpaceX's colossal Starship rocket. This thing is just huge.
It's massive. Colossal. They say it a million times. All right, lots to come in the next 60 minutes. First up, though, let's get to Charlie Pellet. Check on the trade.
Hi, thank you very much. We're looking at a down day right now. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 3.1417%. We've got the S&P 500 index lower by 12, drop there of 0.2%. Nasdaq Composite Index down 12, a decline now of just under 0.1%. Stocks lower across the board. We did get an inflation report this morning that reinforced bets that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates, even as some areas of the economy do show signs of sluggishness. We'll have more with our Michael McKee coming up in just a moment. 10-year right now, 4.29% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.69%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is higher by 2%. Right now, 81.35 a barrel. Spot gold down 0.6%, 21.60 the ounce. And today we've got Bitcoin lower now by 3%, 70,910 on Bitcoin. Some of the story stocks we're following: J.P. Morgan Chase has been fined a total of $348 million by regulators over gaps in its trade surveillance program, which failed to monitor conduct of its employees and clients. J.P. Morgan Chase shares, they're down now by 1.5%. So again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P right now down 10, drop there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So another U.S. data drop, you know it well. PPI rising in February by the most in 6 months, driven by higher fuel and food costs. And that kind of added to evidence, Tim, that inflation, it remains a bit elevated.
Okay, we got some separate data, too, that showed retail sales rose last month by less than forecast after a steep drop to the start of the year. That underscores concerns about the durability of consumer spending. Meanwhile, applications for jobless benefits decreased to a 3-week low. When we look at all the data we got today, I think this was the most consequential day of the week.
Let's see what Mike McKee has to say about it. He's Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent, joining us right here in studio. Was this the biggest day?
That's a good question.
We did have CPI earlier this week, but...
well, it's interesting the contrast between PPI and CPI, and they don't relate directly to each other. They each have more of an input into PCE than the Fed's favorite indicator than each other for the most part. And anything that comes up in PPI at the raw goods level will take a while to get into CPI. But CPI food was flat, no increase at all, and PPI food went up. The numbers were not good, as you mentioned. 0.6 rise in the headline PPI, largely energy, but it was double what we saw last month and double expectations. I tend to look at the supercore PPI, which you take out food, energy, and what they call trade services, which is basically for retailers and wholesalers what their margins are. It can be a way of looking at company margins and how they're doing.
Right.
And that went up 0.4 after a 0.6 gain in January. So we are seeing some return of inflation pressures down below. Now, this is 1 month.
Yep.
Yes, torture any Fed official, they'll say it's only just 1 month. But it is something that has to be on their radar screen now as they get ready to come up with a new set of economic projections and dot plot.
All right, so let's bring in also Daniel Hornung. He's Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. He's there on the lawn of the White House. Daniel, great to have you here with Mike and Tim and myself. On inflation, is the White House confident that the Fed will ultimately get to that 2% marker? Is there any kind of internal conversations that maybe 2% isn't the right mark here, that there are macro issues going on that maybe is going to keep inflation higher post-pandemic 4 years out, but nonetheless, many have said things have changed here in our economy?
Well, it's good to be with you. You know, I won't comment on monetary policy and the Federal Reserve. You know, I think what I can say, if you take a step back, you know, our progress on inflation does continue down from, you know, a peak of 9% to the 3% range. Always, I think we've expected some seasonality in January and February. We didn't expect the progress to continue on a straight line. But I think if you look at what we have from CPI and PPI and now looking ahead to core PCE for the month of February, expect, you know, some continued progress there on that core annual inflation number. And, you know, from the president's perspective, I think, as you saw in the State of the Union, a continued focus on his part of continuing to really make clear to the American people that he has a series of plans that would lower costs for American consumers, and really drawing a contrast with the Republicans in Congress who have not taken up his plans and in some cases have focused more on other issues like tax cuts for large corporations and the wealthy.
Well, those are long-term plans. They will take years to have really an effect on prices. Does the president have anything, or is there anything that the National Economic Council is suggesting that would help the Fed in its goal and bring down inflation in the short run? Because obviously you have a kind of November 5th deadline for convincing Americans that things are better.
Well, it's also on that front to look at the progress that has been made, really the significant progress in resolving disruptions in supply chains and getting Americans back into the labor force. Really, I think, a result in part of some of the president's policies to drive a strong recovery. That has contributed significantly to bringing inflation down while keeping a strong job market. In addition to the proposals that I talked about a moment ago to do things like lower the cost of housing and lower healthcare costs, the president is also focused on using the administrative tools he has to do things like taking on junk fees, where we're seeing hidden fees that make it more difficult for consumers to understand the true costs that they're being charged. So you'll see the president focus on those kinds of administrative actions as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the conversations happening within the White House, within your circle, about communicating what you all see as achievements when it comes to the strong economy that by many measures people would consider a strong economy? Because it doesn't necessarily seem like it's totally resonating with voters poll after poll.
Well, I think there are two important things I'd say. The first is really making clear that in part because of the president's policies, we've had one of the strongest recoveries in the world, strongest recoveries on record. And what that has meant is even after accounting for inflation, wages are higher than they were before the pandemic. Wealth is higher than it was before the pandemic, but also being very clear that the president understands there's more work to do to lower costs for families, and that he has a very concrete set of plans that would do that, again, really different from Republicans in Congress who focused, instead of on lowering costs for the middle class, on cutting taxes for large corporations and the wealthy.
You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Daniel, is some of the macro issues. And I understand, you know, the White House staying away from specifically what the Fed is doing in Fed policy. But having said that, you guys watch, obviously, the cost pressures on Americans here. I think about something like macro factors like tech isolationism, protectionism. President Biden, of course, just coming, you know, out, was it this morning or in the last 24 hours, about U.S. Steel retaining American ownership. And I do wonder about, are there substantial macro factors out there that you guys are having internal discussions out that maybe need us to maybe rethink about some of the cost pressures that might remain on Americans longer term?
Look, I think from the president's perspective, we need to be sure that our economic strategy is durable, is resilient, and is leading to the kind of long-term growth that can be broadly shared. We think it's very important that we have strong international partnerships and an open economy. At the same time, we need to make sure that American workers are feeling the benefits of our economic policy, that the middle class is feeling the benefits of our economic policy. That includes things like investing in a strong manufacturing base here in the United States, and it also includes things like making sure that our tax code is fair so that middle-class Americans, in some instances, aren't paying higher tax rates than billionaires. So you'll see a continued focus from us on those range of issues.
Well, speaking of manufacturing, why is the president opposed to Nippon Steel buying into a U.S. steel company? They're an ally. The plants would remain here. So what's the problem?
Well, the president this morning in his statement said that he's of the belief that a U.S.-operated and U.S.-owned steel sector is vital to the national security interests, economic interests, and supply chain interests of our country. There's a process from here, but I won't get ahead of that process. I'll just stay with what the president said this morning.
But in terms of just the pushback, you know, about pushback on China, you know, will there be some adjustments to the Trump, let's talk about Section 301 tariffs on China, to align with the president's priorities? And more broadly, how are you thinking about the intersection of China policy and the president's domestic economic agenda?
Well, look, there's an ongoing review of the Section 301 tariffs. I'd say more broadly, with respect to our economic relations with China, I think that the president has been clear that we should build a strong competition with China, ensure that we're promoting U.S. interests, but also, where we can, work with the Chinese on mutually beneficial and mutually agreeable issues that allow us to create a strong economy here in the United States.
Well, the administration has been considering additional tariffs on China and perhaps in some other countries in the region as transfers become a big issue. Is that something you would do before the election?
Again, we have an ongoing review of the tariffs that I won't get ahead of, and merely say, I think from the president's perspective, we need to ensure that our trade policy, like the rest of our economic strategy, is really focused on boosting living standards, boosting wages, and boosting economic well-being for the middle class in this country.
Well, so appreciate your time. Daniel Hornig, thank you so much, Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, there on the lawn of the White House, talking about, obviously, the inflation prints today and yesterday, and also more broadly about administration policy. And, of course, our thanks to Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent Michael McKee. Mike, thanks so much.
Well, of course, also on the agenda down in Washington is the future of TikTok. And it's up in the air right now because one day after the U.S. House of Representatives voted to ban it in the U.S., it could get sold to new ownership to alleviate what U.S. lawmakers say are national security concerns. Meantime, enter former U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin because he's got an idea when it comes to new owners of the wildly popular social media app. Check out what he said earlier on CNBC.
I think the legislation should pass, and I think it should be sold. I understand the technology. It's a great business, and I'm going to put together a group to buy TikTok.
You're trying to buy TikTok?
I am, because this should be owned by U.S. businesses. There's no way that the Chinese would ever let a U.S. company own something like this in China.
That's former U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin earlier on CNBC. With more on TikTok, with us from our L.A. Bureau, Bloomberg News technology reporter Alex Barinka. Alex, good to have you with us this afternoon. So what do we need to understand here about how likely it is or how realistic it is that a group of U.S. investors, along with former Treasury Secretary, could actually buy an independent TikTok?
Well, there are a few hurdles to clear before that's even an option. This bill still has to pass through the Senate, which we've written could be a tougher battle than we saw in the House. But let's assume that if happens. Let's assume that this bill does pass and the company has 165 days to either divest from ByteDance or be banned in the U.S. For a group like Steve Mnuchin to actually acquire this company, there are a few options. They could acquire it outright. Bloomberg intelligence analysts valued it at $35 to $40 billion for just the U.S. business. So they would need a pretty significant check size. When we've seen deals like this in the past, I think Twitter might be a decent example if they want to keep this company private. About a third of that is debt, 2/3 of that is equity. So that's a lot of dollars there. If that group comes together, whether it's Mnuchin or other buyers, it would also need the review of the president. The way that this bill is written right now, the president would have to sign off on any kind of agreement, and we'd have to kind of clear the fight that might come out of China. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said in the past that they would block any kind of sale. So a lot of ifs there, but it does seem like Steve Mnuchin is a person who might know how this goes down. You'll recall, as the Treasury Secretary under Trump, he oversaw CFIUS. That is the kind of intergovernmental agency that reviews deals and was very involved in the prior dust-up with TikTok when Trump tried to ban it in 2020. So the man surely knows the asset, as well as a lot of people out there in the industry might look at this as an amazing asset. But as I said, there are a lot of ifs until we get to that point.
Well, what do you make of the former U.S. Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, coming in here? I mean, he's obviously someone who knows how government plumbing works, specifically when you're talking about, as you said, foreign deals here. So I don't know, what are you hearing about kind of he specifically coming in potentially with a group here to make a deal?
He certainly knew how to operate under the government in the Trump organization, and because he knows kind of the players that would be involved in CFIUS, not only the Treasury, but folks from the DOJ branch and other intergovernmental agencies, he might know what it means to actually clear some of those national security concerns, which certainly have existed before now, as this review in the government of TikTok has been an ongoing process. He also is very involved in the banking industry. He certainly knows financiers and might be able to kind of swing the tides to his end. I'm hearing some comparisons to someone like Elon Musk. What Mnuchin doesn't have that Musk did have is a war chest of his own. What Mnuchin might have is contacts elsewhere. I know he has a lot of ties to places like Saudi Arabia.
Alex, how much would this cost, do you think?
So Bloomberg intelligence analysts are valuing the U.S. business at $35 to $40 billion. If you slap a deal premium on that, we could see something that's higher. So not insignificant when it comes to just TikTok's U.S. business.
That's real money, Carol.
It is real money. 10 seconds, Alex. Oracle, 4 years ago, under Trump, they were considered as somebody who could get involved with TikTok. Is that likely to come back very quickly?
They have more debt than they did back then. Currently, it seems like they're happy to be just a business partner helping them protect U.S. users' data.
You're a gem, as always. LA Bureau, that's where we find Bloomberg News technology reporter Alex Barinka. Coming up next, also caught in the crosshairs of politics and national security, Steele. That story is next.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all declining right now, with the S&P down 13, right now at 51.51. That is a drop of just about 0.3%. Dow Industrials down 118 now, lower by 0.3%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 18, down 0.1%. The underperformer by far, though, Russell 2000, it is now down 1.7%. 10-year, 4.29%, with a 2-year at 4.69%. Spot gold right now down $12 the ounce, down 0.6%. Crude is rallying 2.2%, 81.44 a barrel. And Bitcoin right now down 3.7%, 70,445 on Bitcoin. The Biden administration is offering a $2.26 billion loan to help Lithium Americas Corp develop a Nevada lithium deposit that is the country's largest. Shares of Lithium Americas Corp, they're up now by 8.6%. So again, recapping, stocks are lower. S&P down 13, drop right now of 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. Well, among our most read on the Bloomberg today, President Joe Biden, and we talked about this a little bit in our last segment, President Joe Biden saying the U.S. Steel should retain American ownership, coming out against a takeover by Japan's Nippon Steel. Despite the risk of upsetting a key ally, the U.S. steelworkers also said to oppose the deal. The shares, they are down again today, another 9% after dropping about 13% yesterday, now trading at levels last seen before the Nippon deal was announced back in December, so somewhat suggesting that investors increasingly skeptical about its chances of success and an ongoing federal review.
It is, after all, happening, Carol, during an election year, which is part of this. How did we get here? And also, for a look at the U.S. steel industry, with us we have Bloomberg News White House editor Jordan Fabian in our D.C. bureau. Also with us, Bloomberg News metals and mining heavy machinery reporter Joe Doe. He's here in our Bloomberg studio in New York. Jordan, I do want to start with you. Just give us an idea of how we got here and why something like this is on the White House's radar. I mean, Carol was talking about this in our previous interview. Is this something that's political, or is it something that's fundamental to the U.S. economy?
I think it's a little bit of both, Tim. You look at something like U.S. Steel. This is iconic American company, even though it's not such a big part of the steel industry anymore. It really embodied American industrial might in the 20th century. This is something politicians from all parties care about, and it's particularly sensitive for Joe Biden. When you campaign as the most pro-union president in U.S. history, and the United Steelworkers are saying we don't want the sale to happen, that kind of boxes in the president. And this is someone who's running again against Donald Trump, who's also pledged to block the deal. He's worried about jobs going overseas, about strengthening domestic manufacturing, and so this environment led Joe Biden to put the statement out this morning saying effectively he doesn't want this deal to happen.
All right, Joe Doe, come on in. Size Scope, that's what we do at Bloomberg. How important is U.S. Steel to the U.S. economy, to U.S. interests, to U.S. national security, to the U.S. steel industry, or steel overall?
Yeah, I'm going to say some things that would probably anger some of my steel sources. U.S. Steel is not hugely important. It's not unimportant, but it's not hugely important in the way that actual large companies are. Like, they're not Netflix or Apple.
It's an $8.5 billion company.
It's an $8.5 billion company. Yeah, that's what it is. And if you're at dinner parties, that's kind of what you tell people. And not too long ago, it was just a $2 billion company. But again, as Jordan said, it does represent something much bigger in the minds of Americans. And I'm not saying that just to sound great, but that's kind of what's at stake here. It's what it means in the minds of Americans.
I mean, is there a risk to U.S. national security, to our access to steel, if this deal goes through, Joe?
On the surface of it, no.
Okay.
But, I wrote a story a couple weeks ago that was a long weekend feature about Dave McCall, who's the president of the United Steelworkers, and it dug into his mindset on this whole thing. And one of the things was we talked to a CFIUS lawyer who had previously led the national security part of the government handling CFIUS for about 10 years. And he said, listen, here's the way I'll break it down, is sometimes the needs and wants of the union actually align with national security, in the sense of, if the President of the United States and the Defense Department and the Treasury and the Commerce Department all determine that these 4 mills are important to keep running for various reasons, and they believe that those jobs, however many thousand they are important for economic reasons, then they can declare that is a national security interest. And they said further, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing for Nippon. It can be CFIUS says, listen, you can have this deal, but you have to carve out these assets, or you have to secure, say that these assets are going to get significant investments, or that these jobs aren't going to be lost. There's a lot of things that could happen.
Jordan, weigh in on the national security or potential national security concerns. What's the conversation happening at the White House? What are your sources telling you about the way the president thinks about this from a national security perspective?
Well, it's multifaceted. I mean, as Joe pointed out, there's concern about domestic manufacturing, especially in the wake of the COVID pandemic, when there was shortages of medical supplies. That prompted the administration to do a review of broadly the U.S. supply chains, and they're really focusing on making sure critical industries like steel manufacturing still have domestic capacity. That's one. Two, and Joe and my colleague Josh Wingo have reported on some concerns arising about Chinese assets related to Nippon Steel. This is an administration that's really tried to drive a hard bargain with China, try to, as they say, not decouple but de-risk from China. So if you have a Japanese steel company with exposure to China controlling this symbolic U.S. steel manufacturer, which also might have some national security implications, that's something they're looking at too.
All right, first of all, we have a new drinking game, CFIUS, because we've said it twice in like the last, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, with TikTok stuff too.
I'm not quite sure what you drink yet. Well, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
exactly. Having said that, Joe, come on back in here. What do we know about these assets that potentially have connection? Nippon Steel's assets that I guess have connections to China. What do we know about them, and how intertwined is that relationship between Nippon Steel and China?
Yeah, this was a story Josh Wingrove and I had broken a couple weeks ago, and we said there were 9 facilities inside China that are owned by Nippon Steel that produce about 3.6 million tons of steel. Now, let's be clear. This steel is value added. It's like products that consumers buy. It's not raw steel making in the way we think of steel, right? 3.6 million out of a portfolio capacity of like 85 million potentially. I think it's 65 million right now, 85 million if they buy U.S. steel. So it's barely anything, right? However, one of the things that we understood is the administration's looking at this is because anything connected to China is obviously a lightning rod topic politically in Washington. So even though, like, if you talk to any investor or any steel person, they're like, that's not a big deal. They're not looking at the politics aspect of it, which is Japanese steel company about to buy U.S. steel company that actually has U.S. in the name, just so happens to have some facilities in China. It's just not a good look, right? And I'm not saying, oh, it's definitely a problem, but I think this is one of the reasons why we reported out that they're looking at it.
Well, help me out here, and Jordan, maybe come back in here. I mean, how do we think about U.S. Steel, Nippon, if that deal goes through, and with some assets in China, and we have Apple that has a very close relationship with China, right, and does a lot of manufacturing. Like, how do we kind of dissect who we think is okay and who has some problems?
I mean, it's a great question, and certain people raise questions about Apple's manufacturing in China. But look, I mean, this is a new deal that's happening. This would be sort of U.S. assets then falling under this foreign company's control, and so I think that's the concern. And it's been interesting to hear the conversations between industry folks who thought this deal would be a breeze. Seem to just completely misread the political climate. And even though we're talking about Chinese involvement in a U.S. company, that's unprecedented. A foreign company taking over U.S. commodities company, that's unprecedented. But in this kind of political climate, in this kind of election year, with U.S. Steel in the name, as Joe just said, it's going to be a sensitive matter, and a lot of people in the industry and seemingly in Nippon seem to misread that.
Jordan, what about the risk of potentially alienating an important ally like Japan?
It's a huge risk, no doubt. In fact, the President Biden is going to be hosting the Japanese Prime Minister for a state dinner in less than a month. So this is the timing is fortuitous. On one hand, you have Biden going to the Midwest, trying to appeal to blue-collar workers there. On the other hand, he's got to have some kind of answers for Prime Minister Kishida. I asked this question in the White House today. They didn't seem to be too worried about it. They kind of brushed it off. But look, I mean, this is going to raise questions about is the U.S. a reliable investment partner? Like, can foreign companies do business with the U.S. without politics getting in the way? So I think there's going to be some tough questions for the administration when the Japanese delegation comes to town.
Joe, to be fair, the demise of the U.S. steel industry has been,
overblown.
Yeah, it has it. Okay, so give us some perspective. And where is China when it comes to steel?
Ignore China for a second, and let's just look at the U.S. It's 100 million to 110 million, sometimes 120 million tons of production per year.
And remind us what U.S. Steel is.
U.S. Steel's about 20 million of that.
Okay.
China is like half of the world's production, and if we're talking over 1 billion tons of production. So like
the dominant player,
right? And the worry had always been that China for a long time was just dumping metal into the rest of the world, and that hurt our markets and everybody else's markets. And the U.S. spent a lot of years putting up tariffs that actually were necessary. And we're not talking necessarily about the Trump tariffs and by 232. Obama did some, and they were useful. But yeah, I mean, it's still a significant market. We consume 65% of the 110 million tons that we consume in the United States per year.
Right.
65% of that is American made. It's made by Nucor, U.S. Steel, Cleveland Cliffs, Steel Dynamics, and a number of others. So it is significant, and it's robust. The only reason people think that it is not robust is because there aren't that many people working in the industry anymore. And that's because it's highly automated.
Right. Interesting. All right. Jordan, last thought. I don't know. What's next? Like, what do you guys, as you cover the White House and what they might do next, or what we might hear from Nippon Steel, what are you kind of watching out for?
We're going to be watching the CFIUS process very closely. We're trying to figure out, is this the avenue in which President Biden might try to kill it? If he does, that might raise some legal concerns. So does he choose CFIUS? Is there another avenue he might choose? And also, what does the statement mean? Does he mean absolutely not, no Nippon Steel deal? Or can there be changes made to it that might satisfy President Biden? So we're going to be looking to get answers on all those in the coming days.
Joe Doe, do you assume 5 seconds that this is going to be done before the November election, or is this something that maybe drags over?
If you asked me yesterday, I'd give you an answer. Right now, I have no idea.
Interesting. All right, guys, thank you so much. Great coverage on this. Jordan Fabian, White House editor at Bloomberg News, out there in our D.C. bureau. Joe Doe, metals and mining, heavy machinery reporter, Bloomberg News, right here in our studio. Thanks, guys.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. Amy Morris is in the Bloomberg 991 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, former President Trump was in a courtroom today for a hearing in the classified documents case in Florida. In a pre-recorded interview that aired yesterday on Newsmax, Trump said he had every right to take those documents.
I took them very legally, and I wasn't hiding them. We had boxes on the front of and a lot of those boxes had clothing, and we're moving out, okay? Unfortunately, we're moving out of the White House.
The judge said it would be an extraordinary step to throw out the case based on the Trump argument that the law is too vague. No ruling yet, though. China is calling on the U.S. to stop, quote, unreasonably suppressing TikTok. That's after the House overwhelmingly passed a bill that would ban the viral video app in the U.S. unless its Chinese owner, ByteDance, sells it. The U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, spoke exclusively to Bloomberg.
We know it will happen. We know that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, will take advantage of that technology to strengthen itself at the expense of the American military. We're not going to do that. We're not going to compromise on national security, and we're not going to negotiate.
U.S. Ambassador Nicholas Burns spoke with Bloomberg's Stephen Engel from Beijing. If and when TikTok is for sale, former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he'd be interested. Mnuchin told CNBC he's putting together a group to help purchase the video platform, again, if and when it goes up for sale. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need. Like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
From the UK, and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype, or manufacturing possibilities with investment, or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I did that all in one. The idea is you pressurize the handle. The gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blade, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
Intelligence conference only days away, and expectations are high for the semiconductor maker to deliver news that will sustain the blistering rally in its stock. NVIDIA GTC will take place March 18th through the 21st in San Jose. Again, NVIDIA shares down now by 3.3%. Again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P down 16, drop right now of 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, check it out, everyone. Episode 3 of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. It's dropping tonight. It airs tonight at 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Originals. You can also catch it Friday at 7 p.m. on Bloomberg Television, and the podcast already available for download at Bloomberg.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg Originals Chief Correspondent Jason Kelly. He's here to give us an idea of the latest episode of The Deal. It features Jason, the CEO of SMAC Entertainment, Constance Schwartz-Marini. This is a company that represents Michael Strahan, Deion Sanders, Common, and more. Talk a little bit about this talent agency, because they don't all operate in the same way. They don't all have the same missions.
Yeah, I was. First of all, thank you for having me. Always good to see both of you. My former neighbor upstairs in Quick Take, and my former. I think we could say spouse.
Just my former. Yes.
Exactly.
Work spouse. Work spouse. Honey,
Work spouse. So Constance is a fascinating character because, as you guys can definitely appreciate, we know like the big names, the Strahans. We had him on the show last week. And one of the reasons we wanted to have Constance is because she helped create the Michael Strahan we know today. She helped create the Coach Prime phenomenon. Erin Andrews, she worked with Snoop Dogg, you mentioned Common, so many different people. What she saw going back to the early 90s was there was massive potential for athletes and entertainers to be businesses beyond what we already knew them for.
And not in media. Like I think about right now, you look at the morning shows, right?
Yep.
And media, how much they are dominating and bringing in potentially a newer audience, but really appealing generally.
Yeah, one of my favorite anecdotes that Constance talks about in the show is she had been working with Michael for a long time, and he was inducted in the National Football Hall of Fame. Not surprisingly, they do a big event at a New York Giants game, and Constance is standing on the sideline watching it all happen, and a friend of hers is there with her daughter, and the daughter looks out on the field and says, "Mom, why is Michael from Kelly and Michael on the field right now?"
Live with Kelly and Michael.
Exactly, live with Kelly and Michael. And and everybody sort of looked at Constance like, "Oh my God, is she going to be mad?" And she was thrilled because what she knew then was he had transcended, and that's her job, is really elevating people beyond what we know about them from the sports world.
Okay, so we can't talk about the intersection of sports and culture without talking about what happened with Taylor Swift over the last year. It's something that you guys talked about on the program.
We did, and it was so funny you never know where these things are going to go, and Erin Andrews is somebody that Constance has worked with very closely. In fact, you guys may remember, Constance and Erin Andrews did something with me at the Power Players event that we were all at together in Los Angeles a couple of years ago.
That's right.
And so Erin Andrews and Constance created this line called "Wear" by Erin Andrews. And who showed up at a Kansas City Chiefs game wearing some "Wear" by Erin Andrews but Tay-Tay herself? And not surprisingly, guess what sold out within like 20 minutes of that being on television for 6 seconds? And Khan talks about how they saw it on TV and there was just this like huge text exchange and calls being like, is that our stuff? It's our stuff. I mean, and it was just,
It's like, hallelujah though, right?
Exactly. And really, to your point, Tim, just the absolute manifestation of all of these things really coming together, business, sports, culture, just, transcending.
Well, how does she think about when considering a client or somebody pops up on her radar? Is there something that just goes bring that she just thinks, okay, that's somebody I kind of want to work with, and here's why?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question, and I think yes, but it's more gut than anything, and I think it is some sense of ambition and some sense of wanting to be more than. And listen, there are plenty of athletes and entertainers, actors who are like, this is what I do. I want to focus on this, and the rest of it is just noise. But there are others, Strahan, Alex Rodriguez, being sort of a primo example of this, who just want more and they see more for themselves.
Does does Derek Jeter fall into that category? Doesn't work with them, but that's your next, right?
That is our next episode is Derek Jeter dropping next Thursday. And listen, we talk about the relationship between him and Alex, his time with the Miami Marlins, obviously his time with the Yankees, winning 5 World Series. They're friends. They're friends. I mean, keep in mind, back in 1997, I believe, they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated basically as teenagers, first coming into the league. So they've known each other for a long time. It has been a long and winding road, but you'll hear in the episode, I mean, toward the end, I say, you guys seem good. And Derek's line, which you may have seen in the trailer, is, I get asked more about my relationship with this guy than I do about my wife.
It says a lot.
Yeah.
Hey, Jason, before we let you go, something that I know is really important to you is Brackets for a Cause.
Right?
Really important to Bloomberg, too, of course. Explain what it is for people who might not have been participating in recent years.
So every year, right around this time, March Madness, we're getting towards Selection Sunday, which is this coming Sunday, where the fields will be set for both the men's and women's NCAA Division I basketball tournaments. we have put together for the past 9 years a charity brackets tournament, $20,000 buy-in. You pick a charity, and the pool gets split among the top 3 in each side. It will be, once again this year, $1 million in total, so $500,000 split evenly between the men's tournament and the
second
women's
year that
tournament.
it's $1 million?
Second year that's $1 million, yeah.
Wow.
So
Keep going.
we
Sorry.
upped the ante,
Yeah.
and people like jumped in, and it's super fun, as you guys can appreciate. CEOs, Titans of Wall Street, a little competitive with each other. They kind of get into
Well,
it.
I know we talked about it last time, but it's like I used to sit next to Jason when we were working together closely, and like it would be amazing. You'd walk in the morning, and people would be like, here's where I am. Like, where am I in the ranking? Like, they were obsessed with it.
Literal billionaires in my inbox saying like, okay, I've done the math, and here's where I think I am. Like, if this happens and that happens.
Can you give us any preview of who's bought in so far this year?
So one person who we're really excited to have back, and shout out Profit, and all of a sudden somebody's like, hey, here's $250,000 that you didn't really ask for from a bunch of ballers. Like, that's pretty cool.
We've had a lot of fun doing it and then giving it off. It's such a great thing.
Thank you.
So glad to hear about it. Of course, that's Bloomberg Originals Chief Correspondent Jason Kelly. Look for more information about Brackets for a Cause, because we'll be certainly putting it out on the Bloomberg. And also check out The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly, airing tonight at 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Originals. Also catch it Friday on 7 p.m. on Bloomberg Television, and the podcast already available for download at Bloomberg.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Our buddy, Jason Kelly.
Thanks, Jason. Hey, stocks off their worst levels of the day. The S&P 500 now down about 0.3%, as is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The NASDAQ 100, which is, of course, tech-heavy, down fractionally, only 0.1%, Carol.
Little change. Straight ahead, folks, a third major test flight for SpaceX's massive Starship rocket. We're going to talk about that. That is our one more thing on this Thursday, March 14th. Pi Day, as I like to say.
There's a SpaceX connection.
There is. This is Bloomberg.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Ratio.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
And Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Thanks, Tim. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took to the Senate floor today to deliver a scathing speech calling for new elections in Israel.
As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th.
Schumer criticized Netanyahu and his government for turning away from a 2-state solution to the conflict. He called it a grave mistake. Schumer says Israel cannot survive if it's seen by the rest of the world as a pariah. Former President Trump's legal team is in court in Florida as the federal judge hears arguments on motions focused on dismissing the charges brought by special counsel Jack Smith. The former president faces 32 counts of unlawfully retaining classified government records. He's accused of taking them from the White House during the presidential transition, but Trump denies any wrongdoing. SpaceX's mega rocket ship Starship blasted off on another test flight from Texas, but contact with the spacecraft was lost at the end of the hour-long trip. The company said it lost the signal from Starship as it neared its goal, which is a splashdown in the Indian Ocean. Now, today's launch outperformed the previous 2 tests. Those exploded just minutes into the flight. No people were on board today's test flight. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
5, 4, 3,
All right, everybody, in our One More Thing today, that is the sound of SpaceX's colossal Starship rocket on its 3rd major test flight, notching its longest Starship flight before losing its rocket, lifting off at about 8:25 a.m. Wall Street time this morning.
Yeah, it's a big deal because it brings SpaceX just one step closer to using Starship to launch satellites, and then eventually, Carol, bring humans, not just to the moon, but beyond the moon, to Mars, which is Elon Musk's ultimate vision with a rocket like this.
Well, and you think about, there are folks talking about, you have to build a settlement on the moon, right? So then use that as a launching pad to go further and further into space. So pretty significant. It, was a notable improvement over the past 2 events, which each ended quickly in explosions. So that's why going off being successful after those two other attempts. This was important.
And it was also a big deal that they got
SpaceX.
approval for it. In this case, the craft successfully separated from its super heavy booster as planned and reached near orbit in space. So it did surpass the length of its two prior test missions. But that's the way this stuff goes. I mean, it's space. Like, this is not easy. And they have to do test flights. This obviously had no people on it.
Right.
But to prove that they can get to the moon and beyond, they have to prove that they can do this without people on it first.
A little perspective. I was kind of a space kid growing up, or at least my dad was certainly very involved. But Starship is the largest and most powerful rocket ever developed, taller than the Saturn V that sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. So the company already has a contract with NASA to carry people on Starship to the moon. So, again, first step, an important step. And so the success of this was something very significant for SpaceX.
Also a reminder about those prior two launches. The first one almost a year ago, and the second one back in November. Those both ended with Starship blowing up, so this is a huge improvement from that.
All right, you can read more too at Bloomberg.com. All right, everybody, for those of you who are watching on TV, the close is coming up next. For those of you staying with Tim and me, Bloomberg Business Week continuing on radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. Coming up, we're going to get into how America's plumber deficit, not good for the economy. Love this story.
Also, a check on the health of the healthcare industry. We do that with the CEO of Incredible Health.
Also, why brands should be worried about CakeGate. We're talking about the Royals.
And what we can learn from bad leaders. We talk about good leaders a lot.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of it in the next few hours.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. We were just...
Happy Pi Day, Carol. Oh, I forgot to say that when we were talking about SpaceX.
Yeah, oh my God.
They celebrated by eating pie because of Pi Day.
They're such clever, those rocket scientists.
I was going to say, they are rocket scientists.
All right, we're just about 1 hour away from the closing bell on this Thursday. Welcome back, everybody. Tim and Carol here. Coming up, we've got a really kind of cool economic indicator. Young people shunning an occupation. It's physically demanding and sometimes dirty, though well paid. The consequences could be far-reaching. This is a great read.
Yeah, and speaking of another profession under stress, nurses. We're going to get a pulse check of the healthcare industry with the CEO of Incredible Health.
All right, also we're going to get into why the Kate Middleton mess, yes, CakeGate, should terrify brands. And speaking of that, we've got another guest talking about leaders specifically.
Yeah, not good leaders necessarily, what we can learn from bad leaders. It's all in a new book about what happens when bad festers.
And then luxury postpartum retreats. It's a thing, everybody. They can cost more than $1,000 a night.
Very familiar with this. Yes, that's all I'll say. We didn't go.
There's a story.
There's a story. You'll have to wait to the end of the program to hear it.
All right, first up, let's get a check on the trade and your top business stories. Once again, here's Charlie Pellet.
Hey, thank you very much. We got 58 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index. Cannot ignore the Russell 2000, all in the red right now. Got to begin with the Russell 2000. It is down now by 2.2%. Small cap shares slumping. We've got the S&P to put it all in context, down 26 points now, a drop there of 0.5%. Dow Industrials down 224, decline of 0.6%. NASDAQ is down 0.4%. NASDAQ 100 index down 0.45%. 10-year 4.29% with a 2-year 4.68%. Gold, spot gold down $13 the ounce to $21.61, drop of 0.6%. A rally for crude, 81.17 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate up 1.8%, and a retreat for Bitcoin now down 4.2%, 69,707. Going to be interesting to see whether we get Bitcoin holding below $70,000. Retail sales up less than forecast after a steep drop to start the year, underscoring concerns about the durability of consumer spending. The value of retail purchases, unadjusted for inflation, increased 0.6% from January after a downward revision to the prior month. Jill Blanchard is president of Enterprise Client Solutions at Advantage Solutions, and she talked about the consumer and how they are holding up.
We see consumers buying things on promotion, so we're definitely seeing a big shift in behavior. Promotions are a top strategy for manufacturers and for retailers, but they've got to be really careful not to sacrifice tomorrow by giving away today. And consumers are becoming more disloyal to brands because they're waiting for brands to be on sale or switching to a brand to be on sale. I mean, consumers' new loyalty is disloyalty.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Intelligence podcast. Among specific retailers, Walmart, little change, down less than 0.1%. Macy's shares, they're up 2.6%, says it is open to engage with Arkhouse and Brigade. Target shares, they're down 1.7%. And Amazon shares today, Amazon right now up 1.4%. Recapping stocks lower, S&P down 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Really appreciate it. Well, you heard some of the numbers from Charlie, but they're worth repeating right now. The S&P 500 down about 0.5 percentage point. Well, the Dow down about 0.5 percentage as well. As for Treasury yields, they're higher across the curve as a hot inflation report underscores the challenges that the Fed faces in achieving the so-called last mile of its inflation goal of 2%. We should note when we talk about these numbers, Carol.
Yeah.
I always like to bring in the perspective. The S&P 500 is still up 7.8% so far this year. It's only the middle of March.
Yeah, some people might say, okay, I'm done. I'm good. I'm going to take a rest. Let's see what Bloomberg News Markets reporter Abigail Doolittle has to say about it. She's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. I don't know, this trade, got another drop of economic data. What's interesting to you here in terms of movement?
Really just the topsy-turvy volatility. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up deeply in the red or if we end up green. We started out in the green, and what made that interesting is we had what was legitimately not just warm, but a hot PPI number. Stocks really shrugged it off for the first 10 to 15 minutes of trading and then started to sink and then came back and sunk and came back and sunk and came back. And right now we have the S&P 500 down 0.5%, the NASDAQ down a little bit less. The stocks, we do have NVIDIA down once again, NVIDIA down 3.1%. And I think that's really the area to focus on because NVIDIA, if it gives up its last low, we're going to see a floor drop out. The support is really going to go. And while it's clearly a great chip company and a big player, the main player in the AI space, and then it's, more traditional business. This stock, from the beginning of the year until its peak, doubled. It doubled in literally,
short period of time,
yeah,
right?
less than 3 months, about 2.5 months. So the idea that we want to see some of that come off the table, it's probably healthy for investors over the long term. The question is, though, if we do see some sort of a sell-off in NVIDIA, if yields continue to go higher, because the idea that liquidity could become a little bit tighter, is there going to be a spread into the other big tech names? Will we see our Apples and our Googles and our Metas start to sell off? And then if that's the case, will there be a rotation into safety? Would that be enough to hold up the markets, or are we going to see some sort of overall pullback?
What I thought was kind of surprising about today's trade, Abigail, is that there are a lot of individual stocks that are making big moves to the downside. And they're all doing it for their own reasons. Like Fisker, for example, is down 50% after bankruptcy concerns. The Under Armour is down after some executive shuffle happening there. You got Tesla down as a result of another downgrade from a bank. And these are all not necessarily big stocks. I mean, Tesla certainly is. But you have moves that are, over the last few months seem relatively huge.
Yeah, no, those are big moves on idiosyncratic stories. The one that I would say does matter is Tesla, because Tesla is at its lowest level since basically last May. It is very close to making a big breakdown. And I mean, I would say Tesla is very close. If it does not hold, let's just call it, because I know that some people do like levels, 158, 155, somewhere in there, we're probably going to see Tesla go back down toward $100. Now, the thing to remember is this is very Tesla-esque, if I may say, because, Tesla 1 year will be up a lot, and then, remember 2022, everybody, I mean, that was the ultimate buy at $95. There was such a rebound. So there's this love-hate relationship with Tesla, but one legitimate concern for investors there is, where is the growth? The growth is not as much as it had been. It's really, shrunk as prices have been cut. Margins have come in as a result of that. But at the end of the day, you're making a bet on the EV market, on Elon Musk.
One thing I thought was interesting, I looked at the S&P 500. I was looking for gainers earlier to talk about later with our TV colleagues. Google, Alphabet, it's among your top gainers in the S&P 500 today. Microsoft is too. Google, I couldn't find any real news. Apple's up about 0.9%. So it's interesting, kind of the churn in it. And I feel like the common threads or themes, it doesn't feel like it's there. It's just kind of all over the place.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that about Google and Microsoft, because what comes to mind for me is when NVIDIA's flying higher, Google's going down because there's some sort of negative headline about their AI, whereas I feel as though with the AI money maybe coming out of NVIDIA a little bit, it might be going into Google, it might be going into Microsoft. Apple, yes, I noticed that earlier because we love to talk about Apple here. Apple up 0.8%. So if there is a big seller out there that we've seen this year, they've taken a break again, which means this week they took a break, I think, on Monday. They're taking a break today. So maybe the position, the culling of that particular position, that is slowing, which that's a good thing for the markets, given the fact that it's the second biggest weighting.
Just in 20 seconds, last thing on your radar ahead of next week before the Fed, we hear from Fed Chair and the Fed. Any other catalysts?
Yes, triple witching tomorrow and S&P 500 rebalancing. Super microcomputers being added. Guess how much that stock is up over the last year?
This is the one that I'm obsessed with. This is a chip.
350%.
It's crazy.
Triple that. Yeah. It's up 1,100%, 1,112% over the last year. Now, if that doesn't need to consolidate, I don't know what it does. But once it goes in the S&P 500, all those index managers are going to have to buy it. But yeah, with triple witching, NVIDIA options, there could be some volatility and volume tomorrow.
Yeah, I feel like I'm noticing a theme, a trend, like a volatility, like in different parts of the market.
Yes.
All right. Yeah.
$63 billion
I
company.
love this company. It pops up on my gainers list every once in a while, or it has a lot this year.
Tomorrow.
So, yeah, okay.
Big time.
I'm making a notation.
Did you love
for
it this
tomorrow.
much a year ago?
I
hope you bought it a year ago.
I don't think it was on my radar a year ago. All right. Abigail, thank you as always. Bloomberg News markets reporter Abigail Doolittle giving us a rundown on the markets. We've talked a lot about the trade. We've talked about different economic indicators. We've got a really cool one.
We do, and there's a problem. We've got a plumbing problem. And Carol, it's a cost that all of us are paying for. Despite an above average salary, the pace at which the U.S. is minting new plumbers is lagging retirements. The widening plumber deficit matters for households facing hefty charges to fix a leak. I think we've probably all been there.
Totally.
That costs what? And businesses trying to get new buildings completed on time and on budget. In fact, the plumbing deficit cost the U.S. economy a whopping $33 billion in 2022. That's according to one analysis. We know all of this because Bloomberg News global economy reporter Enda Curran writes about it for Bloomberg Business Week. It's the far-reaching consequences of the U.S. plumbing problem. He joins us from Washington, D.C. And Carol and I could not get enough of this story.
Love it.
And it's also something that we talk about a lot because we know how much it costs to hire a plumber. What is it about the plumbing industry that's sort of emblematic of the worker shortage that we're facing here in the U.S.?
So there are some specific kind of stigma issues around plumbing. I mean, as you know, it's such an important function. It goes to the heart of our daily activities and our economy. Without plumbers, we don't have clean drinking water, for example. But speaking to those in the profession, the teachers and the young students who are starting out in their career there, they say that it just doesn't have the appeal of other roles because it's tough physical labor, for example. I spoke to one young plumber who gave the example of having to dig a trench in the open in the middle of summer one day, having started at 5 a.m. that morning. It's seen as dirty work. There's the perception of lying on your back, fixing someone's toilet. And of course, the hours aren't, hours can vary, but they're not seen as especially social compared to other roles. So when you throw all that into it and consider then this conditioning of younger people over the decades that they should gravitate towards the university away from the trades, the end result, speaking to those people in the industry, is that the skilled trades like plumbing just don't feature very highly on the wish list for young students these days in school. They much prefer a university education. But the pitch is you can become a plumber, get a good job, and have much less debt.
Well, how quickly can you become a plumber or an electrician? Because my understanding, and we'll sometimes have someone come into our home, and it's like they've got an apprentice with them who has to do that for, I thought, a substantial period of time. But set the record straight, because is that part of the problem? That is it just taking too long to train them or allow these folks to kind of go out on their own?
Well, it's a process. It's a 5-year process that kind of rotates between the practical laboratory work and the tuition in the school, and at the same time being attached to an actual licensed plumber. So over the course of it, it is 5 years before they get their full certification. But along the way, their wages will be increasing. And as I mentioned earlier, they are not accruing the debt that you would be to have to get a life skill or trade in some other part of life. The end result, when you do come out of it, you can get a good job, well-paying, and potentially for life if you wanted.
That's what I wanted to hit on here. Is we talk so much about the student loan crisis here in the U.S. and I mean, my jaw just drops when I talk to parents about the cost of college for their kids right now. I mean, we're talking upwards of $60,000 to $90,000 per year for a cost of college here in the U.S. at some schools. And you did some looking into the apprenticeship program, some schools for this stuff. How much does it end up costing total for a 5-year program?
Yep. So let me give you the example of the Plumbers and Gas Fitters Local 5 Apprenticeship School. Forgive me, I just needed to read it out to get the name right. I went to that school and they pay the tuition of the students. The money comes from both the unions and the employers.
Excuse me? They pay the tuition?
Yep.
Say that again.
They pay the tuition for the students for the 5 years.
Okay.
And the students need only pay $1,500 each over the course of the 5 years. But they are also required to buy a pair of boots and a measuring tape. And this is what, when I speak to the teachers and the students out there, this is the great appeal for them. Like you mentioned, you've got this whole political debate going on about student debt, and you have the legacy of students trying to pay off that debt. Well, here's a walk of life where you can go in, get a good qualification, get a good skill set, that does go beyond fixing toilets, by the way, and then come out of it relatively debt-free and with a good salary.
So obviously the pre-apprenticeship courses that you looked into are just overflowing with students, right?
Well, this is where the rubber hits the road. So I cited an example of a brand new pre-apprenticeship program that has been put on by community college in Maryland to deliberately attract young people to become plumbers. It's a well-equipped brand new laboratory. They have 18 seats and they have 3 students who have enrolled. And this is what speaks to the idea of the plumber shortage, why people just aren't necessarily being attracted to it. And again, you speak to the plumbers and the teachers, they say you've got to go into middle school upwards and condition children that A, it's good to have a skill, B, you don't have to, it's not all about university, and then C, they're making the point that schools also have to have practical classes now, like woodwork, for example, allow students to do that, and then along the way they can make up their mind whether it's university or trade.
You know what they need? Yeah. They just need more plumbing influencers. Okay? I'm not joking. I heard Paul Brennan laugh. This is not a joke, but this is like a thing on TikTok and Instagram and stuff.
Plumbing influencers?
Influencers for every trade. For woodworking, for plumbing, for cleaning cast iron. I mean, seriously, everything is out there.
Having said that, I mean, you think, I remember like a show like This Old House, like they were trying to recruit students because nobody wanted to do construction anymore. Nobody wants to do this. I mean, but I want to go back to Enda. Does someone really need 5 years to become a plumber? If the demand is such an issue, isn't there, I don't know, like I don't know enough about it. And I certainly want if somebody comes into my house that they do it right so that all of a sudden I don't have a flood. But does it really have to take that long? Is there any move to kind of figure out how to condense the teaching so we can get people out there?
I mean, look, that's obviously a fair question. I'm sure that teachers will be open to that debate, but I have to say I have a newfound respect for what they do. I happen to go along, I shadow them in the classroom, watching what they're doing. You've got the technical side of it, which is the quantitative quotient, learning those blueprints, figuring out their math for the measurements, figuring out how to get the water flowing in the right direction, the right weight, the right pressure. There's a whole technical side to it that I guess I wasn't fully aware of. And then there's the physical side to it and the the labor side to it. So it certainly would take some time before you're fully confident that you would let this person run amok in your house. I would imagine it takes a few years at least, but whether that's 4 or 5 years, I'm sure that's probably a valid point for debate, but that's where the program seems to be set at the moment.
Hey, and just in the last 30 seconds, dovetail this with your most recent reporting about just the overall worker shortage and the way that the immigration in the U.S. needs to change in order to fill these jobs.
Yeah, that's right. So these companies, and especially those in construction, say they cannot get the workers. Part of that solution, as we talked about the last time, is legal immigration. But in this case, it speaks to the idea that children at school, if they're encouraged to learn a trade instead of university, could go some way towards filling some of those skills shortages as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's like carried out construction, electrician, like there's lots of things. Enda Curran, thank you as always. Global economy reporter at Bloomberg News. They're in our DC bureau. His story featured in the forthcoming issue of Bloomberg Businessweek magazine, but you can read it now on the Bloomberg terminal, of course, at bloomberg.com/businessweek.
We're seeing stocks take a leg lower. The S&P 500 down 0.6%, as is the NASDAQ Composite. The Dow down close to 0.7%.
Hey, one check on the economy. We're going to get another read in one particular sector of the labor market. We're talking about healthcare workers. That's coming up next, everybody. This is Bloomberg.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks trading lower across the board, just about worst level of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell, and the S&P now down 34 points at 51.31 for the S&P 500 index, a drop right now of 0.7%. Dow Industrial is down 271, a decline of 0.7%. The Nasdaq Composite Index also lower now by 0.7%. 1%, down 116 points. Russell 2000 now slumping by 2.5%. 10-year yield 4.29% with a 2-year at 4.68%. Spot gold down 0.6%, 21.62 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down up 1.7%. WTI 81.08 a barrel, and Bitcoin now down 4.8%, 69,651 on Bitcoin. Another hot inflation report is reinforcing bets that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates, even as some areas of the economy show signs of sluggishness. Indeed, lots of economic data today for investors to sift through. Anastasia Amoroso is Chief Investment Strategist at iCapital.
When you have good economic data, the markets inevitably cheer that because good economic data is good for earnings, is good for revenues, is good for profit margins. And one of the things that we have seen this year, as the economy is stable and accelerating, we've also seen the earnings growth expectations are also stable and actually firmed up a little bit. So that's why I think the markets have been able to push back the rate cuts and still move higher.
Anastasia Amoroso of iCapital Network, and a story we've been talking about here on Bloomberg Business Week. President Biden calling on U.S. Steel to retain American ownership amid moves by Nippon Steel to purchase the Pittsburgh-based company. Shares of U.S. Steel, they are down now by 10%. ADRs of Nippon Steel down by 3.1%. Again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P down 33, a drop there of 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. So if you've been paying any attention, this shouldn't be news to you. Post-pandemic, we face a shortage of healthcare workers. Here's how dire it is, Carol. Last year, the rate of job openings in what's referred to by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as healthcare and social assistance was 7.6%. It's the second highest percentage going all the way back to 2001. That was when the data started being recorded. All of this according to the nonprofit researcher and consultant, Altarium.
All right, so it shouldn't be of any surprise to you that 88% of nurses say that staffing shortages negatively affect patient care. That's
high.
It's a lot. That's almost everybody, right? That's just one of the findings from Incredible Health's annual State of the U.S. Nursing Report. This is a voice that we have been reaching out to for several years now and really giving us a great gut check on what's going on in the nursing community and the healthcare sector overall. Back with us is Dr. Iman Abu-Zaid. She's co-founder and CEO of Incredible Health. It's a marketplace that connects nurses and hospitals, which is why she has a great vantage point of this. Great to have you back with us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, how are nurses doing? And what's changed? I mean, I do feel like every time or in the last few years, it's not been great for nurses, especially coming off the pandemic. But give us an idea of how they are doing.
That's right. So Incredible Health, we just reached a recent milestone of 1 million nurses in the U.S. on our platform. So 1 in 3 nurses and 1,500 hospitals. So a lot of the data and information I'm sharing today is from that. What we're seeing is that 88% of nurses are pointing to staffing shortages negatively impacting patient care. And that's showing up in several ways. It means that nurses are stating that they're caring for too many patients at a time, that they're performing tasks outside of their job description, and that the understaffing is impacting patient care in the form of medication errors, readmission rates, and so on.
This is not good. I mean, it's concerning if you're considering at all going to a healthcare facility, right, or you end up by some sort of accident. We've all been there.
Right.
We all need medical care. This is kind of scary stuff. Dr. Abu-Zaid, in your report, in the research that you've done, in the surveys that you've done, is there any sign of improvement here?
Yeah, there's definitely some good news that we've uncovered. So first is that 80% of nurses plan to stay in the profession until retirement. And this has been a big increase since the years of the pandemic when it was as low as 55%. So their sentiment around staying in the profession is improving. And then also the mental health of nurses is also improving. It's a 6% improvement compared to last year, as we're seeing more and more health systems implement tools and strategies to help the mental health of healthcare workers.
What about the pipeline into the nurses we're going to need over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? How is that looking?
So there's still a lot more work to be done there. The demand on the healthcare system continues to increase because our population is aging. And even though we are graduating more and more nurses every year, it's still not enough to keep up with that demand. So there's still more work to be done there.
Is it just, can I just ask you though, is it just folks who don't want to be, we just did a story about younger generation don't want to be plumbers for a lot of different reasons. What about in terms of nursing, which for women for a long time was a really great way into the workforce? But I'm just curious, younger generations, how are they looking at the nursing profession?
So the demand for the nursing profession is actually higher than ever, right? So there's tens of thousands of Americans who want to enter nursing school and they're on wait lists. But we have a bottleneck with nursing schools. They can't train as many as we would like because of their own capacity constraints around faculty. There's also another bottleneck happening after nursing school around training programs. And so we do need more and more training programs. And then we also have a challenge of retirement. So over the next 5 years, 20% of nurses are on track to retire. And so this is an older workforce as well. So
what does it take?
You're right in that it's a very appealing profession in terms of just expanding socioeconomic opportunities too. And you can really change your life and your family's life by going into nursing, especially given where salaries are today. But we just need to get more of them.
You can also, from the perspective of the work week and determining your own hours. I mean, some of my friends who are in the profession are working 3 days a week and they're working full time. It's a ton of work, but you know they're getting 2 extra days at home with their babies, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Hey, Dr. Abuzaid, what does a traditional nursing education look like right now, and is there any opportunity to sort of do the acceleration that we saw during the pandemic, or like a rethink of what it takes to become a nurse, considering there's such a backlog right now?
Absolutely. I mean, it is a regulated profession at the end of the day, and there is licensing involved as well. So the education is the traditional 4-year bachelor's degree, but there are also associate's degrees and RN diplomas that are shorter in duration. We're also seeing more and more community colleges offer nursing programs too. So it's not just the academic, the top tier academic programs and the for-profit organizations, but we're seeing more and more community colleges offer nursing programs too, which is a great thing.
Are all of them affiliated though with some kind of hospitals? I have a sister who initially, that was her first profession, a nurse, and it was affiliated directly with a hospital. It was right next to it, and they were in the hospital, I think, from the get-go. Are they all like a community program? Are they affiliated so that people actually get, individuals get hands-on experience?
Yes, many of them are affiliated with a health system, because once it comes to the clinical training, which is part of nursing school as well, you do have to do it at a facility as well. And so that's we're seeing more and more of that as well, as more health systems form partnerships with nursing schools.
What are you seeing on the platform right now in terms of the burnout that you referenced, and about different types of resources that are becoming available as these health systems realize they need to make sure to retain this talent?
Yeah, so we're seeing a variety of trends. So one I wanted to mention is AI, actually. So 90% of nurses have not used AI yet, but for those that have used it, they've used it for recommendations on patient care, for improving the patient intake process, and they've used it in their job search process as well through Incredible Health, because we offer a whole range of AI features to accelerate and enhance the job search experience. So that's sort of an interesting piece from this year's study that we didn't see as much in previous years.
Well, how much further can it go in terms of AI, artificial intelligence, really helping out this profession?
So, the majority of nurses, over 60% of nurses, believe AI is going to have a negative impact on their employment or a negative impact on the industry. But honestly, I do think that's just part of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that exists among all Americans around AI, just because it's not prevalent in widespread use yet. And that uncertainty should come down over time.
Dr. Abuzaid, I am just wondering though, there's a lot of times I hear conversations with my colleagues in my own home of just trying to access a doctor, and they're like, sure, you can have an appointment in 6 months. Or just, we're seeing stresses in the healthcare system, and obviously from the conversations we've had for you for quite some time, across the board, certainly in the nursing community. I mean, are we in crisis? Are we headed for a crisis in some regard as you look at kind of the trends and the numbers of people coming in and who want to continue to do this job?
So our surveys of hospital executives show that 80% of hospital executives do describe the nursing shortage as a crisis. And when you look at the statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you see that we are the gap between the demand for healthcare and the supply of healthcare workers continues to grow, and that trend is projected to continue for many decades to come.
Hey, before we let you go, just in the last 30 seconds, I want to go back to AI because you also have some other interesting research about AI, not just who's using it. But do you think AI can help alleviate in the coming years the shortage of nurses?
Absolutely. There's certain aspects of a nurse's role that can be supported with AI, certain very specific tasks like patient intake and like creating care summaries, like determining the next recommendations for patient care. And we see that in use with doctors as well. And so it's only a matter of time before it starts impacting nurses' tasks as well, which hopefully will help them to do more with their time.
Always important to kind of find out what's going on, certainly in this area. Dr. Abuzaid, thank you so much. Appreciate you checking in with us once again. Dr. Iman Abuzaid, co-founder, chief executive officer of Incredible Health, joining us there from Austin, Texas. But yeah, man, I think about this and the concerns about maybe, that we're not going to have all the workers or already don't in terms of the needs and demand in healthcare.
Shortages everywhere. Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling for Israel to hold new elections. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning says the floor speech today from Senator Schumer is significant.
It's a sharp break, it's unusual, and it's very telling from the highest ranking Jewish elected official in the United States.
Bloomberg's Mike Dorning. Former Trump aide Peter Navarro lost his bid to stay out of prison while he appeals his contempt of Congress conviction. Navarro was sentenced to 4 months in prison after a 2-day trial in Washington before a federal jury. He was ordered to report to a prison in Miami on March 19th. Former President Trump was in a courtroom today for a hearing in the classified documents case in Florida. In a pre-recorded interview that aired yesterday on Newsmax, Trump said he had every right to take those documents.
I took them very legally, and I wasn't hiding them. We had boxes on the front of and a lot of those boxes had clothing and we're moving out, okay? Unfortunately, we're moving out of the White House.
And the judge said it would be an extraordinary step to throw out the case based on the Trump argument that the law is too vague. Also, in another Trump case, prosecutors say they are open to delaying the start of Trump's March 25th hush money trial. And the judge has not ruled on that yet. We're still waiting for that ruling. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez is facing federal corruption charges. He's reportedly considering running for re-election in November as an independent. NBC News reports he's preparing to collect petitions. SpaceX launched its colossal Starship rocket on its third major test flight earlier today. The mission was cut short when the signal was lost upon re-entry. One of the major driving forces behind this mission is national security. And SpaceX says they learned enough from this mission, even though they lost the signal, they can still call it a win. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are selling off just about session lows right now. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is with the Thursday edition. We've got Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Shai. That's right. U.S. stocks are under pressure, helped by that hot PPI number this morning. The Dow is currently down 275 points. S&Ps are down 32, while the NASDAQ is down by 0.6%. The U.S. 10-year yield jumped to 4.29%. Gold is down 12. Oil still in the green, but Bitcoin is lower by 4.6%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, only energy and telecom were in the green. Utilities and real estate were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Microsoft and Amazon, while Honeywell and J.P. Morgan led to the downside. After earnings, Dick's Sporting rose 15% to a record. Lennar fell 7%. And in other news, Microsoft broke out of a range to an all-time high. In the tech space, Steve Mnuchin is putting together a group to try to buy TikTok. And wrapping things up, Adobe reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type Squawk, S-Q-U-A, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody. Thursday session, 18 minutes to go. Charlie just breaking down the numbers. You've got stocks just bouncing off their lows of this session, down about 0.6% on both the S&P and the NASDAQ 100. I feel like, yes, that's interesting, but really the story of the day is the move up along the U.S. Treasury yield curve. Two-year note with a yield of 4.68, and we've got a 10-year that's moved up to 4.29. So we saw kind of a bump up of about 10 basis points. In particular, I think along the whole curve. I'm just looking here, but definitely on that 10-year note. So
I thought, Carol, you were going to say the 6% decline of Bitcoin is the real focus.
I was not going to say
you weren't.
6%. Although, does it matter? Because how much is it up this year?
Let's just say risk-off day. I guess we could say that.
All right, let's see what our Drive to the Close guest has to say. George Young, back with us, partner portfolio manager at Villery & Company, back with us from New Orleans. Last time I think we talked, we were actually in New Orleans with you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I do remember it last time. That was great.
Yeah, it was fun to be there and get another slice of life around this country.
Market's a lot different since then.
Yeah, exactly. How are you seeing it? Quite a run-up, right, in terms of the equity trade. Is it time to maybe, I hate to say, take some money off the table, take some profits? What's the smart take right now in this environment?
Well, two things. It's been kind of a tale of two cities in a lot of ways because the S&P is up 36%. That's been fantastic. But if you slice it, look at it a little bit more carefully, it's a different story because there are a lot of stocks that haven't participated. S&P up 36%, but on the other hand, the rest of the market, if you look at the equal weighting of the S&P, it's up only 23%. So that's great. But what's happened is the really popular stocks, the Magnificent Seven, which represent 30% of the S&P, have done really well. But that means that there's great valuations to be anticipated on stocks that are selling at a bit of a discount to the S&P's historic earnings. So we think there's opportunity there. But again, don't fall in love with a stock. It'll never love you back. So you need to be taking some chips off the table where you've made money and put it into things that haven't participated and have some patience. I think that's the hallmark there.
What's a stock that wouldn't love someone back right now?
Well, I think one of those is a play on the consumer, being Caesars, meaning there are a lot of folks that love to game, love domestic gambling, and they will go to Vegas and they'll go to a lot of.
You're saying this is one that would love you back.
That will love you back eventually, but it's cheap right now. Now, in terms of a stock that probably you should sell, I mean, on everybody's lips nowadays is NVIDIA. You can't get enough NVIDIA. Any cocktail party you go to, you hear about artificial intelligence. So in that case, I would say NVIDIA to pick one that is overvalued. I think that's one that should be sold, or at least sell a portion of. Take some chips off the table, to use a gambling analogy.
So
is that a stock that?
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Go ahead, Carol.
Is that a stock that you shouldn't love right now that won't love you back? Is that your take?
That is correct. NVIDIA and a lot of the Magnificent Seven are overvalued, and they're stocks that people say, I'll never sell them, and that never makes any sense.
So interesting to hear that right now. I mean, do you think that the market is poised for some sort of bigger pullback right now? It's, again, a day like today where we are seeing a risk-off mood, still reminding people the S&P 500 is up more than 7.7% this year.
Correct. No, I remain optimistic about it because I think really the consumer is still strong. The unemployment numbers remain somewhat low. Consumers still spending, and that's really what drives the economy. That's 60% plus of what this economy is all about. And again, here at Villery, we invest domestically. We don't look internationally. Domestic is our focus.
Hey, let me ask you something. Performance is always important, and I just, you guys and your fund, it's a balanced fund. Year to date, it's up about 4.5%. According to Bloomberg data, that puts you in the 56th percentile against your peers. 5-year, you're up just shy of 4%, and that puts you in the 5th percentile. I am curious, conversations you have with investors in terms of performance and what you think might have potentially held you back.
Right. We've been more small and mid-cap focused and more value focused. If you look at what happened last year, 2023, the exact opposite is what did well.